This is Audible.
How to influence people and become a master of persuasion. Discover advanced methods to analyze people, control emotions and body language, leverage manipulation in business and relationships. Written by John Clark, narrated by Andrea Nelson and Byron Armstrong.
Congratulations on purchasing How to Influence People, Guide to Master the Psychology of Persuasion, and thank you for doing so. The following chapters will discuss about the power of persuasion, learn how to control your emotions, read body language to analyze people, and many more manipulation tactics you will be able to use in business, relationships, and with friends. The information found in this book will best explore the techniques you need to learn so you will be able to master the psychology of persuasion. Thanks again for choosing this audiobook. Every effort was made to ensure it is full of as much useful information as possible. Please enjoy. Introduction. There is a belief amongst most people that when sequences and situations are created to change the perception and reactions of a person, it is a negative thing. But if we were to look closely, we would observe that this is something that manifests on a daily basis in our lives. We are constantly trying to change how people see us and the things we do. Sometimes we want them to view us in a positive way, and other times in a negative way, depending on what we want to achieve at that moment in time. Some people call this manipulation, and it is indeed so, but manipulation is not necessarily evil, as most people would lead you to believe. Many believe it to be associated with only exploitation and deception for personal gain, but fail to praise such tactics when they are used positively in eliminating unhealthy habits and behaviors. To put this in perspective, do you remember the days when your parents had to promise you gifts and extra playtime just to get you to complete your homework? That is manipulation in its simplest form, but it doesn't match up with what people like to believe of manipulation. They clearly were not manipulating you for reasoning for their own benefit. If anything, it was for yours. People turn to manipulation for a variety of reasons: to advance their own purposes and agendas, to help you attain your own goals and objectives, to gain power, or are already causing until they are too far gone in the game. Some people keep manipulating everyone every time without the slightest hint of guilt. Such people are psychopaths. This audiobook has not been produced to turn anyone into a psychopath, nor is it written to challenge the status quo of manipulation in the world. It is written to show you the ropes at a skill many already utilize. Yes, everyday people manipulate others, in their business environments, in social settings, in friendships and relationships. So it is high time you sat down and learnt the tricks to an art that all influential people possess. Chapter 1. Manipulation as a Tool of Masters. In the world nowadays, a variety of situations necessitates or determines ascribing someone the title of master. But in all of those situations, the master is the one who has most influence on the people around him or her. The power such a master possesses could have initially been attained by skill or reputation, but to avoid losing it over time, the master has to be adept at retaining his or her influence. Such a person is usually held in high regard, regardless of status or wealth, and very rarely do these people attain such a status by being themselves or by being ordinary. Being so might make people to like and admire you, but the true respect and power over others must be gotten by other means. This is where manipulation comes in. Manipulation goes hand in hand with power. Wherever you can sense the effect of manipulation, there is bound to be an imbalance of power. The power in such societies is usually concentrated in the hands of a few who could be referred to as masters over others. These people are well versed at making people think along the same lines as them, making people act along the same lines as them, making people follow them unconditionally, and generally being able to influence the thoughts and opinions of those around them effectively. If you were to look back in history at some of the most influential people, one of the things you would observe is that the ideas they advocated were not necessarily moral or even right at all. Their beliefs were not necessarily righteous or ethical, but whenever they needed it, people and followers flocked to their sides, ready to follow them to the end, and ready to defend the ideas they had been taught to believe and defend. From terrorist leaders to controversial politicians and men of power, who, regardless of the revulsion their ideas seemed to generate, still seemed to be gaining more power. Why was this so? Because they knew how to influence and control people. It didn't matter what they said, but provided they could make people think how they wanted them to and act how they wanted them to, they were never at risk of being powerless. Their power didn't originate from a sense of righteousness or correctness, but from the sense of followership they were able to instill in people. It is this sense of followership and loyalty that you should aim high to achieve through manipulation. Manipulation is not just your key to power, it is your key to success, because with power comes the ability to thrive off people in any environment. This ability is inherent in all successful people. Whether you are an entrepreneur or someone with a daily job, as long as people are involved, the knowledge of people and how to influence them is necessary for your success. Some people have those once-in-a-lifetime ideas or a revolutionary approach to solving a problem, but without the knowledge of how to thrive on the backs of others, they would never be able to fully consolidate on what they have. The ability to manipulate people is yours to use as you wish. You could use it in your search for personal happiness, or in your quest for wealth and affluence, whichever one is your choice. This book, however, has only one aim: helping you become a master in whatever you choose to be or do. The Secrets of the Greatest Men. Manipulation and deception are one of the numerous skills possessed by the greatest and most powerful men to have roamed this earth. Not all men are Gandhi, and if the history books were properly scoured and its annals scrutinized, many of the men who have exerted the most influence on the world would be shown to be manipulators, who merely hid their more negatively perceived talents in a shroud of piety, idealism, and oratory. This is not to say that these men were evil or bad. They just understood the need to do what was necessary when necessary, and if this involved tweaking the emotions and thoughts of people to generate reactions that were favorable to their causes, so be it. And so, the truth behind many of the world's greatest men and leaders is not divine intervention or an alignment of the stars, but rather a lack of the emotional restrictions that plague the ordinary men. Many of these men, from Caesar to Napoleon, weren't evil or psychopathic, but had a goal and a vision of the world that couldn't be achieved by simply following the rules and hoping that other persons saw things the same way they did. No, great men do not wait. They act. Not to limit this to only men, we have had some pretty powerful women in the past who understood that to wield real power was not a matter of honesty or being a good wife, but rather how to get people to do what you want when you want it. That is the essence of manipulation, to get people so dependent and so in awe of you that you could easily influence their principles and guide their actions in the direction you believe it ought to be going in. Take, for instance, the sexual manipulation of both Caesar and Mark Antony by Cleopatra in a bid to protect her interests and titles. It is mostly overlooked, but that has in no way detracted from her brilliant manipulation of two very powerful men. What I am trying to say here is that many of the events that have shaped the world politically, industrially, even religiously, are so mired in manipulation. It's hard to dismiss its usefulness in both the old days and the modern world. It is used as a business tactic, as a means of motivation, or as an aid to persuasion in almost any facet of life. In the modern world, manipulation is synonymous with politics and is widely thought to be used only by politicians, business executives, and the like, but if you look closely, you would see that we all practice a form of manipulation. In fact, any setting in which there seems to be an imbalance of power probably contains an element of manipulation, and since this imbalance in power is a staple of the realistic world, it could be said that manipulation is rife in the world and in our everyday life. There is manipulation in our daily interactions, in our personal relationships, our business relationships, and even religious interactions. Consider the clergy, who spends a large chunk of his sermon emphasizing on punishment of sin and the travails of hell. He might be speaking the truth, but his words are meant to impart fear in you, and it is that fear which he counts on to make the difference in your approach to life. That is a classic case of emotional manipulation using fear. The cleric does not mean to do this, but deep down he realizes that this is the most effective way of knocking into people the need for his or her God. He does not mean to manipulate you, but he does it nonetheless. That is what manipulation is. You might truly respect the autonomy of a person when you feel you need to influence them. You could unknowingly find yourself trying to take advantage of their emotions, and this means you are manipulating them. You do not have to be evil. You simply need to recognize the necessity for a line of action and possess the strength of mind to do what needs to be done. Over the course of this audiobook, you would learn how to wield similar power over people, how to make yourself indispensable, and how to make yourself capable of greatness. The often overlooked human need to be manipulated. As humans, we have all been blessed with autonomy, the right to make our own decisions and live by them, and any threat to such autonomy generally has us on guard. That is the reason why, when faced with anything, law or person, we believe aims to rip this independence from us, we fight back with or without violence. Take into consideration the numerous uprisings in history as proof of this. The people who led the French and English revolutions did not possess more power than the monarchs in power, but when they felt their needs being thrown out the door and their independence being preyed upon, they fought back, and they fought hard. Our history when it comes to defending our independence is quite rich, from the early advocates of our modern religious facing up to the idol worshippers in their day, to the women throughout history who have fought for equal rights. They might have not realized what they were doing, but they were exercising an innate human need to be free. But just as the need to be free exists, so does the need to be controlled, or the need for order. This need to be controlled is the reason why humans needed monarchs and governments to rule and govern their daily life. Because if left to live life freely and unchecked, we would have been consumed by chaos. But as our population grew and we expanded to cover more territory, so did the influence of such monarchs and governments. The controlling forces on our life wear thin, even becoming insignificant. Though this is on a much grander scale and might, It is a larger manifestation of our need to sometimes be guided by others. Thus, it is apt to say that every one of us needs guidance. The guidance might be spiritual, academic, or psychological. But if we were to trace the source of our knowledge, we would find that it must have originated from a person or book, and very rarely is it completely original. To better understand this, consider how you always feel the need to try and impart the knowledge you have unto others, either by holding lectures or by giving advice. This need to guide one another is how we humans have passed on our knowledge over millenniums. It is because of this inherent need for guidance, knowledge, and control that we are susceptible to manipulation. I'm not saying that anybody deserves to be manipulated, but that everybody can be manipulated. And since whatever is possible is always done, the possibility of being manipulated means that some of us, or rather many of us, are bound to fall victim to people whose goal is to manipulate us. It is the way of the world. The only difference between you and the next person is how good you are at it, and how you want to use your influence and skill. Manipulation is not evil. It's just a tool. It is widely believed that manipulation is evil. I neither support nor assert to this belief. Manipulation is the use of any sort of influence, be it physical, emotional, or financial, over a person, group, or situation to generate a desired outcome. The outcome is most likely one which favors you and your goals, but does not necessarily need to be detrimental to the other people involved. On another note, the belief of manipulation being negative usually assumes that this goal you want to achieve is not in sync with that of your mark or target. But what if it does? Won't it then be more apt to classify your manipulation as a means of motivation, or at the very least, as a positive influence? Consider this. You have a boss who is hell-bent on following a particular line of action as regards a new business deal. Yet, facts and your gut tell you that his approach or decision is a wrong one. But he refuses to listen to the opinions of anyone, probably because his stance is a result of a very old sentiment or bias. In this case, every straightforward and honest approach has failed. Wouldn't it be better to manipulate and tweak his emotions just a little bit, and save his job and the company's balance sheet from recording a loss? In such a case, your manipulation of your boss is still considered immoral, but on the general balance of events, it is the right course of action if all means of rational persuasion have been exhausted. From a conventional point of view, the idea of one person manipulating another is considered a criticism of the manipulator's behavior. But is manipulation always immoral? The above example doesn't seem immoral. When looked at on a grander scale, we would most likely agree that manipulation is rife in our everyday life. But the only times it is actually classified as evil or bad is when it leads to harm, be it emotional or psychology, of the target. Sure, manipulation can expose vulnerabilities that otherwise might have remained hidden. Yes, manipulation could lead to oppression of people, but it could also be the only way to achieve a truly noble goal. Consider this next example. Assuming you are a security officer who was unlucky enough to be on duty on the day a terrorist was captured, and you have credible intel that the terrorist is slated to carry out an attack on that very day, or maybe during the week. You have tried every possible method of rational reasoning, from trying to tap into his or her empathy to offering deals, but the terrorist has refused to budge, and the only way to extract the information without resorting to violence is to employ manipulation as a tool. Is this considered immoral? Or is the immorality simply justified simply because you get to save many lives? Depending on your answer to the above question, the knowledge shared in this book might one day be beneficial to you. If you possess a hardline view on the perception of manipulation and are of the opinion that it can never be used for a positive goal, the knowledge of this book is of no practical use to you, and you're better served stopping here and picking a book that is more acceptable and is less likely to offend your sensibilities. Chapter 2. Mastering Your Emotions and Reactions. Manipulation is a game of emotions, knowing how to read them, how to tweak them, how to play them, erase them, create them, and react to them. Every manipulative move should be aimed at exposing the emotional core of your mark or target, because that is the only way of owning their actions and decisions. But for you to adequately and efficiently effect your desired change in the individual or group of relevance, you have to have an understanding of yourself and your emotions. To put it cleanly, you have to know yourself more than any other person, because only then can you make a move at controlling others. Know yourself. This is key. Knowing yourself is key, if not the most important ingredient to possess before you embark on the road to mastering people. This is because, to avoid overreaching or underestimating yourself, you have to possess an understanding of your abilities, a keen sense as to where your strengths end and where your weaknesses begin. Only with this knowledge can you decipher the direction in which you should be leading your mark, and the approach you should be taking to do so. Such in-depth knowledge of oneself would require a level of truthfulness in accepting one's limitations and a further level of self-discipline to avoid crossing those limits. The idea behind getting under your target's defenses would vary depending on the target, but would require you to either play up your weaknesses while emphasizing your strengths, or play up your strengths while emphasizing your weaknesses. Both require you to be alert. As important as understanding your limits, it would be nothing without an understanding of your emotions, and that would be incomplete without the ability to recognize your emotional markers. These markers are what people see regardless of what goes on in your head, and thus are more likely to influence their thoughts. This knowledge is not achieved by simply making a resolution, but by logically analyzing your every move in a bid to pinpoint how your internal emotions manifest as external actions. This might seem complex, but it is actually quite easy. It just involves thinking about your reactions and emotion as two separate entities, then following them through step by step to the end, and figuring out how one influences the other. Let me give you a hypothetical situation. A friend of yours, who is usually quiet and reserved, walks up to you one day, and she shoves you in the back in a moment of excitement. It was a playful shove, but you, not realizing it were this particular friend, turns back and are about to express your anger before you notice him and check yourself. He sees this and wonders why you would react in such a way, and in a playful manner shoves you again. This time, however, you don't check yourself, but instead launch into a tirade. At the time he hit you the first time, let's assume you were in a rather normal state, not particularly angry or happy. After the first hit, you got angry, but controlled yourself. While this control is necessary to possess for the skill you're learning, the important part of your analysis should be what gave your anger away, since you had not actually reacted. You have to know if it was a clenched fist by your side, a hardened facial expression, a twitching eye, or whatever, because controlling the reaction is only half the lesson. You have to behave outwardly like the thought of a reaction never even crossed your mind. This is the kind of logical breakdown you must grow adept at performing on yourself and your actions. You must abandon the ordinary man's habits of reacting impulsively and start reacting logically. Next, you have to consider your loss of control on the succeeding incident. Such a reaction could point to the shove itself being an act that ticks you off, an underlying problem or problems with the aforementioned friend, or even your limit in such situations. Whichever one it is, you need to get a handle on it and eliminate all emotions from your reactions, unless when you feel it has to be released. Be the master of your emotions. Other than your strengths and weaknesses, another key area of your life and being to pay attention to is your emotions. Most people underestimate the need for a control over their emotions, and that is the major reason they have little control over the emotions of others. I am not advising for you to remain meek regardless of the provocation, or for you to flare up at the slightest sign of resistance. No, what I am saying is that you have to be able to control whatever reaction is necessary in the moment, to bring it out at a moment's notice, and to lock it back up when it has served its purpose. You need to recognize your emotional triggers and work at dulling their effect. Failing at such an important facet of your person could lead you to unwillingly push a target too far, or to allow a target to run wild and free for too long. Meanwhile, mastering the control of your emotion in this way would give the double advantage of reducing the ability people possess to rile you up or manipulate you, while also granting you complete autonomy over your own reactions. As I implied earlier, different targets require different approaches and different treatments, and for this reason, different emotions would elicit different effects on them. Where anger might cause one to be subservient, it might cause another to be more belligerent. This is the major reason you have to master not just the ability to act and create emotional reactions, but also the ability to suppress your more natural emotional reactions, as these said reactions can interfere with the image you are trying to portray. Your control on your emotions is one of the major tools by which you control the perception people have of you. And when it comes to manipulating people, it is key that you control their perception of you, because only then would you control how they will treat you. It is important for you to remember that the initial way by which people judge another's character is through his or her behavior and emotional disposition, and as such, control over both would grant unto you the power to control people's perception of you. From another angle, your emotional disposition towards issues and events is usually a cornerstone of your reputation, at least in the minds of most people. This is a weakness in people. They assume that emotions are almost unchangeable, thereby nullifying the possibility in their minds that one is capable of manipulating his or her emotions to deceive them. They believe that your reaction to a situation would always stay consistent, unless another effect is in play. The trick is introducing another reaction or emotion that contradicts your normal in a bid to gain their attention, while lowering their defenses to deal with your perceived soft spot. Because of this nullification, this is a belief you must always be out to take advantage of. The warning behind this is that before attempting to cash in on this mistake, you have to have fine-tuned your ability to act out scenarios and create emotions. If you are not well versed at this, a smart target might figure out your play before you're even started. Furthermore, when utilizing this weakness, the emotion being introduced should be as evanescent as possible, so as not to confuse the target. What I mean is that with such a tactic, the effect you're going for is the, "Oh, that is so unlike him" effect, and not the "Oh, he has changed so much from the time we met" effect. This means that the emotion to be introduced should be temporary and fleeting, only surfacing for a brief period of time. Most times, the tactic is effective for a particular emotion only once or twice, and should never be attempted consecutively using the same emotion. Here is an illustration of this particular trick. The target is a female, and you have gone through the basics with her, establishing a character and manufacturing reactions for every predictable action of hers. In your bid to seduce her, you have gotten to first base, first kiss, and now you're looking to score a big finish and leave. But she's been very coy and defensive about sex, and you haven't been able to lower her defenses on the issue. One day, an issue comes up between you guys, and ordinarily, you would have let it slide with a smile. But instead, you flare up for a bit, and take to keeping to yourself. She avoids bringing up the issue for a while, but later comes in for the conversation. The major point here is the change from your regular emotional reaction to a more aggressive one. This would prompt her to believe that you might have lost a little bit of emotional control, and seeing as such instability is a constant source of discussion in relationships, your current countenance would require her to have a conversation with you. Bear in mind that the conversation is not for you to petulantly complain about her for not having sex with you, but rather for you to make her feel she is in a position of power to broker peace while considering you to be the victim. You are not making things overly hard or easy for her. Your time to act would come after you have settled the quarrel. It might be right for you to initiate a makeout session rather than to ask her to have sex. This moment in which she has lowered her defenses to accommodate your emotional issues is when you make your move, and if you have played your cards right up to that moment, you are about to get that score you have been hoping for. From then onwards, it is up to you to proceed as you wish, but with smarts, of course. Do not forget, overusing this tactic increases the possibility of exposing your game to your target. Develop your instincts. Instincts are natural. They are either born from experience or you're born with them. It is that voice in your head that speaks to you when you're in a fix and need a quick solution to your problem. It is the one that guides most of your impulsive reactions. I bet you used to doubt your impulses could change, but trust me, they can. Many people believe impulses can only be controlled, but that is for someone who still wants to possess impulses. Real masters of emotions do not just control their impulses, they eliminate them. Only when those impulses are absent do the instincts you have trained yourself in start to kick in. Our instincts are a product of our deeper nature, our deeper understanding, and our environment. They usually mirror the things we have learned and experienced. When we act on our instincts, we're basically surrendering to our past experiences and innermost directions. These directions can be changed, but not easily. To truly develop your instincts is not a matter of turning pages or staring at a screen and absorbing words, but rather putting your skills to the test in real life and facing failure, because only with these can you correct the folly of past experiences and create new directions. You have to put your newly learned tactics to work, feel them out, recognize how to make them click for you, and depending on what you succeed or fail at, your mind will automatically store all of these experiences as either positive results inducing actions or negative results inducing actions. It is based on the presence of this more advanced knowledge that your instincts become sharper and more trustworthy because you stop making decisions steeped in theoretical propaganda and start making experienced decisions. Instincts are necessary in understanding people and situations, because only when you know what to look out for can you correctly react. But in instances where the mark is still more of a stranger, you have to rely on your instincts and experiences to guess what type of person you're dealing with in terms of temperament, likes, dislikes, potential tells, and the likes. Without the necessary sharp instincts, these would be quite difficult, if not impossible. Chapter 3. Knowledge of emotional reactions and how to read them. Reading people is arguably the most vital tool to a successful manipulation. This might be an art to some or a science to others, depending on if they are naturally talented at it or if it is a completely acquired skill. Don't get me wrong. I do not mean to say that some people are born with the ability to read people. What I mean is that it comes easier to some people with time than others. Reading people and their emotions is a historically difficult task, and yet without it, attempting a manipulation is akin to a blind man climbing a mountain. Many believe it to be about making snap decisions based on how people look and jumping to conclusions before you have even shared a word, but in truth, it is way more than that. Before we jump into this, I should warn you that psychologists have confirmed that there is no foolproof way to read or decipher people, and I would like to personally add that many of the methods you might learn might seem contradictory. Having said this, it is up to you to engage your wits and let your instincts guide you. A key facet of reading people is their emotional disposition towards various situations. To really understand them through this means, you need to have watched them react to a few situations so as to give you a feel as to how they might react in similar and contrasting settings. However, emotions are notoriously difficult to decipher, and many amateurs make the mistake of translating signs and gestures into singular meanings. This is wrong, because a sign could denote multiple possible emotions. It is due to this possibility that signs and gestures should not be treated or read as individual entities, but rather should be taken contextually, while also putting into consideration other facts available to you. The last ingredient that is needed to make the result of a reading as close to reality as possible is a sharp instinct. I have spoken about developing this in Chapter 2, and will refrain from discussing further, but in my opinion, it is the most important tool for reading people. Knowing your mark. The first step to reading a mark or target is to abandon all of your previous projections and prejudices about people. These prejudices could be racial, ethnic, etc., but they should all be thrown out, because without a clean slate on which to present your facts, you risk destroying your readings with bias and sentiments. As a manipulator, your main goal in reading people, especially strangers, is not to spot deceit, but to spot openings which could be used to forge connections, or to discover character traits that could be used to your advantage. I would advise that when initially attempting manipulations, you pick targets that are more insecure, lonely, or are possessing of low self-esteem. This is usually obvious from their need to defend themselves regularly, an eagerness to join or participate in a conversation, shyness, tendency to back down from confrontations, and similar behaviors. A general way to get people to initially lower their defenses with you is to act charming. Do not act all weird and slimy with them, but adopt a natural, witty charm, the kind reserved for your principal or favorite high school teacher back in the day. This is especially effective with shy or insecure targets, people who would welcome compliments and are more likely to warm to jokes and strangers faster. Another way is to break down the trust barrier by offering a little of yourself and your secrets first. This part of you doesn't necessarily have to be true, but it must be believable. Once the primary connection is formed, however, it is time to begin information gathering. If your mark is talkative, you're in luck. Simply keep quiet and let the prattle run. There is bound to be at least a tidbit of information scattered in between. However, if the target is more reserved or quieter, a little bit of skillful prodding is needed to tap into the right vibe, and once you get it, be sure to keep the buzz going for as long as possible. Other than information garnered from conversation, you can also proceed to watch the crowd he or she hangs out with, her favorite drinks, favorite color, and hobbies. This might seem very banal, but knowledge of them could give you an in with the mark, and that's all that is needed to improve your status in their lives. Once you have established the right relationship, the next step is to hunt for more private bits of information, the ones most likely to push the buttons you need pushed. Observing and translating emotional reactions. To properly observe a person's reactions and understand the logic or motive behind them, you have to take an objective perspective of the person's actions, devoid of any connections whatsoever. To do this, you first have to establish the nature of the events or situations causing such a reaction to check for its conventionality, because since most people tend to react conventionally to certain things, the abnormalities and oddities are the ones to look out for. Next, you analyze the markers of these reactions in the person so that if such a reaction were to occur for another stimulus, it would be clear what such a person is feeling. Some emotions may possess the same marker and would therefore require secondary markers or experience with the target to tell them apart. The need for marking the emotional reaction of the target as well as its causes is to be well placed to use the emotions to your advantage. Also, knowing the tells would expose to you the presence of a particular emotion, allowing you to adapt to the mood and needs of the person, thus keeping yourself relevant while making them believe that you care. This might probably only be necessary at the beginning of the association, as the person is more likely to show more subservience or dependence as the manipulations grow deeper. Deciphering and translating the emotions of a person might seem tricky at first, but usually gets easier with time. For instance, staying with a new cousin, family relative, or roommate might be difficult at first, but as you start to warm up to them and learn about their eccentricities, what makes them tick, and what kills their buzz, their secrets begin to up to you one at a time. It's the same way with targets of manipulations. You need to invest time in understanding and learning their reactions and what they mean so as to avoid pushing the wrong buttons at the wrong times. Learn to take a cue. Very rarely you might encounter an oddity that more or less does not conform to the reading you have arrived at on a particular person. Do not fret and do not react too swiftly. It is better to ignore it outwardly while watching for signs of repetition. The smart play would be to analyze it. Try to understand what brought about the anomaly, and is it likely to happen again? This is necessary because manipulation is about control of not only the target, but of everything affecting the target that can be controlled. Those that cannot be controlled should be predicted and skillfully avoided to prevent any surprises from occurring. Take, for example, you have cultivated a manipulative relationship with a young lady or man who is quite reserved and is more prone to long periods of silence. Then, on a night out together, the target completely flips script and goes all wild partygoer on you. Do not react hastily. It could be as a result of something or someone in their life that you're not familiar with, and a hasty reaction against a previously entrenched stimulus could be rather counterproductive. Instead, it would be advisable for you to go along with the flow and later question their behavior. This would enable you to gain the knowledge you want without relinquishing control of the situation. This is the idea behind taking a clue. You have to be ready to adapt and shift your position to better understand a situation. To react or to obey. The key to always getting it right. This is one of my favorite rules because it requires patient thinking and smart decision-making. The translation is rather simple. To react is to adopt an active approach, while to obey is to do otherwise. The rule applies to you, the manipulator, and the target. It is simply used to stop impulsive action. The question is quite straightforward. Do you react to a situation or let things slide? This question is one you should never fail to ask yourself before putting another ploy in motion. It would be reckless of you if you were to move too fast, and sloppy of you if you were to move too slowly. That is where the question comes in. It challenges you to consider your status and decide if any further action is necessary. Failure to make the right choice often ends in regret. An alternative question, mostly used at the beginning of a manipulation to better gauge the chances of success of the ploy, is to ask yourself how smart your target truly is. This might seem ordinary, but for you to succeed, you have to have complete faith in your own abilities while steering clear of overconfidence, and most times a good perception of the target's own intellect is the perfect constraint. As effective as this rule could be, there is no trick or shortcut to knowing the answer to the question. To react or to obey could only be answered by you. You are to put every piece of information you possess on the target into play, and then consult your gut and instincts on whether one or the other is the right choice. You would probably stumble a few times during the learning process, but you could also be a natural, getting it right every single time. Whichever it is, remember to always learn from your experiences, because only through our experiences are we ever truly equipped to deal with the future. Practice makes perfect. As previously stated, manipulation has to be worked at constantly to attain the level at which success becomes the norm. Practice and constant use of the skills you learn would sharpen your skills as regards people and how they should be dealt with. All the advice in this book are merely words on a piece of paper or an audio recording without your own ability to bring them to life. Everyone is different, and as such, different methods work for them. This applies to you as much as it applies to your target. You have to be able to bring the ideas in this book in a way that suits your character and approach, and there is no better way to learn to do this than by practicing. Manipulation is a game that deals with emotions, and constant practice is perfect to boost your instincts as well as your confidence. Stick to these rules and warning, and it's only a matter of time before you become a master manipulator. Just like in every other field, without sharp instincts, you are ordinary. Without experience, you carry a large chance of failure. Without confidence, you can do nothing. Practice is important if you are to achieve all three and rise above being ordinary. Chapter 4. Understanding Basic Body Language. When two people meet each other, it doesn't matter whether they're old friends or new acquaintances. They could even be strangers. But they communicate through not only words but gestures. These gestures tend to betray our mental state and express how we are feeling. For instance, if we were feeling bad and irritable, we give off defensive signals. And when we are feeling happy, we tend to be more relaxed and friendlier. These gestures and signals relay our mood to the person or persons around us and affects what they think and how they relate with us at that moment in time. This ability to read basic and common gestures is rather inherent in everyone, but as a result of practice and experience, some people are more adept at it than others. For example, women are generally more perceptive to gestures than men, probably due to the fact that they might have had lots of practice dealing with their kids or those of others. Many common gestures, such as crying, laughing, and frowning, denote the same emotional and mental state in most people, with very little exceptions. However, your emphasis on body language and gestures as a manipulator should go beyond the study of the more common gestures if you hope to become a master. It should at least encompass the knowledge of basic body language for you to truly appreciate its effect on your everyday choices and decisions. You should also be able to notice and translate a wide range of uncommon expressions. Gestures and signals could mean many things in different places, so it would be wise to observe the general trends around wherever you stay and ask questions when necessary before jumping to needless conclusions. Furthermore, the frequencies with which these gestures occur vary with a variety of factors. One of these is age. It has been proven that the older people get, the lesser the gestures they use in communicating their opinions. Another factor is wealth or social class. It has also been noted that people higher up in the social chain in a particular environment use fewer gestures than those below them. These are all generalizations, and exceptions to such are bound to occur. For example, people who are very excited tend to gesticulate more, and those who are bored take on a more reserved demeanor. Thus, a bored teenager could probably use less gestures and body movement in expressing him or herself than an excited septuagenarian. In such a case, the age generalization would have failed. Well, other than these generalizations, it is important to pay attention to the particular gestures of each person while also monitoring their verbal output. Look for contradictions that give the person away as regard whether they are lying or hiding something, and make your next steps based on these deductions. The most effective way of catching lying in a person is to watch out for gestures that betray their true intention. Such gestures or behaviors are usually out of place or out of sync with the message they're delivering or trying to deliver. Understanding from less than words. The ability to tell as much as possible about a person without engaging in conversations is one that would help you well, especially when it comes to securing and developing a new target. When I say developing a target, I mean the first few conversations and meetings you have in which you try to determine the attitude and emotional disposition of the person towards key issues so as to better mold the character you would assume around them. This understanding of a person could aid your quest in many ways. It could portray you as someone who is perceptive and sensitive to their needs, and this is a good way of establishing trust within the target. It could also be useful in predicting the actions of a person as to better react to them. This reaction could be in many forms, varying from a modified approach to a subject to a complete avoidance of another. It is, in summary, a good way to avoid falling afoul of a person before you have been able to achieve what you initially set out to achieve. Many signs could actually mean more than one thing, and should not be taken as a complete truth, but rather as a possible truth. What this means is that all possible translations should be considered before you jump to any final conclusions. This is due to the fact that more than one factor could be in play, and probably the telling factor causing a particular reaction is not even from us, but from another person or situation entirely. Such consideration should apply to both positive and negative reactions, because we, as humans, tend to apply this to only the negatives, while imagining all positive reactions to be of our own making. I'm going to consider the reactions we should or could expect in a first meeting, because I assume that after the first meeting, your status or likely status should be established already. Let us begin with reactions to expect in a first meeting. 1. Acceptance and rejection. Being able to perceive whether someone is digging you or accepting your approach is quite important, as it tells you a lot about the success of your current approach on the person and whether or not you may need to change it. Though it is very difficult to know if your message is getting through, little gestures such as moving closer and interrupting every now and then to put in a point should bolster your confidence that your presence is at least not unwanted. In fact, if you really want to judge whether or not your company is pleasing to the person, it would be more apt to look for the signals of rejection rather than those of acceptance. You should look for signs such as how regularly the person offers an opinion during a conversation, how frequently and how sincerely the person smiles or laughs at your jokes, whether the person retreats whenever you move closer, and how long the person spends in a side conversation with another friend before returning to you, and whether or not they apologize. The regularity with which the person offers opinions show how much the person is concentrating on your words, and this in turn denotes if and how interesting your company is. If the person speaks only a little, it could mean that the person doesn't like you or is bored. Anyhow, if walking away is not an option, you could resort to asking a question and using the person's answer to change the topic. Watch for changes in their reactions to gauge their concentration. Someone who laughs frequently and sincerely at your jokes is definitely enjoying the conversation and is less likely to leave soon. However, someone who just stares at you after a joke or gives a weak smile is probably not impressed by you or your wit. But before jumping to conclusions, the blank stare could also be as a result of a lack of understanding on their part. If after a few minutes of a conversation you attempt to lean in to emphasize a point, and the target, mostly females in this case, retreats, taking a step or two back, it could mean that she doesn't like you, or still considers you a stranger. She is surprised, or she simply isn't feeling the conversation as much as you thought. It might even be due to mouth odor. The trick with dealing with this is to stay calm and pretend not to notice this. Continue with the conversation as naturally as possible, and after a few minutes, attempt to lean in again. If she retreats again, it is probably due to one of the first two possible reasons, or the mouth odor. During conversations with a person, it is quite common for side conversations with a passing friend to occur. The duration of this side conversation could, however, be of significance when it comes to determining how they view you. If the side conversation goes on for so long that you look and feel like you're standing all alone, and yet the person with whom you were conversing hasn't offered an apology, the meaning is quite bad. But if the person constantly cuts short the side conversation to apologize to you, and even takes the hard decision of cutting short and postponing such a conversation, it means your presence is at least appreciated and not unwanted. If the former was actually the case, it could be due to the fact that the target considers your presence to be boring, and the side conversation to be a needed reprieve. If this is so, walk away and do not return, unless the target approaches you. Save your dignity. 2. Happiness. Someone who immediately warms up to you in a first meeting or conversation and is happy to have your company would most likely participate in the conversation, not just butting in to express opinions, but also to tell stories and crack jokes. Such a person is also likely to laugh a lot and may even attempt to introduce you to a few more people if you are a stranger at whatever place you're meeting. It is also possible that the person is intoxicated, and their overly positive reaction is due to whatever intoxicant they might have ingested. The best way to deal with this is to go on with the flow and probably try getting their contact information for a future meeting, but keeping whatever conclusions you may have had aside for when such a meeting comes. A distant possibility is that they are utilizing your company to achieve a goal of their own, say, making someone jealous. I classified this as a distant possibility because it rarely happens, but I still felt the need to mention it so as to stress the need for you to always consider all options and to always stay aware of everything going on around you and your target. 3. Distaste or dislike. This is different from rejection in that the person in this case would probably not even be polite enough to answer you properly. It is rather easy to spot and could include signs like a frown, lack of eye contact, and short or monosyllabic answers. If this happens to you, do not inquire as to what might be wrong or what you might have done wrong. Instead, say your goodbyes and walk away. If you're to approach such a person again, be sure to have a friend of theirs to introduce you first. This could make all the difference. The possible scenarios are endless, but these are the most popular reactions you could come up against. The reason for outlining these situations and how to deal with them is to enable you to use the knowledge of basic body language and how to properly react to them to better make a first conversation or meeting as fruitful as possible. If dealing with failure and rejection is not a strong point of yours, it might be better to watch from a distance how such a person relates with others and judge using these same skills how to approach such a person, or if he or she is worth the stress. The little things are usually most important. We have touched on some of the more elaborate and obvious gestures, and the little ones are up next. These are called little because they are mostly imperceptible and are done very quickly. They are those things one is likely to miss or overlook, such as a quick lick of the lip, a glance at a wristwatch or clock, a glance at another person, or even running a hand through their hair. These things are likely to possess meanings that are particular to different people, and as such, the same meaning might not apply to different people. These types of reactions should not be studied and translated as individual events or reaction, but instead as a part of a larger one. To adequately guess the meaning to this sort of reactions, you need to consider other gestures that might have come immediately before it, what the target was saying at the moment of the reaction, and any possible contradictions between the two. The truth is, such reactions rarely occur only once. Most times they are conditioned reflexes in the person to help them deal with something they are otherwise uncomfortable with. It is equally as rare for anyone to recognize any of these reactions, not to talk of translating it without spending a tremendous amount of time with the person. For this reason, such reactions are psychological gold and should be cherished. These inherent reactions are what we call tells. Recognizing tells and signs could be an art or science. The ability to instantly recognize a tell or sign in a person when you see one could be an inborn or a developed attribute. One could simply spend a few weeks with people and be able to reveal 3 or 4 tells that point to how the target is really feeling, while others spend years and still struggle to recognize one. This is no reason to worry, because While the ability to notice and translate tells makes manipulation easier, the absence of such a skill doesn't make it impossible. Having said this, it should be noted that recognizing such tells can be learned, so if you lack the natural knack for seeing them, you can still manipulate your target, but knowing how to recognize some would definitely be advantageous. Some tells could be the tendency for a person to run his or her hands through the hair, crossing of the fingers, rapid blinking, twitching of the eye, rapping the knuckles on a surface, and many others. These seem like actions that denote rather obvious emotions, but most tells are. The major issue with a tell is that these obvious actions do not actually follow an easily perceivable emotion, and are usually done so quickly they could be mistaken for necessary. Thus, to notice them, one must be observant, and to translate them, you might have a good grasp of whatever situation them might have occurred under. Isolating the situation and breaking it down into a list of potential stimuli could help in narrowing down the possible meanings. Recognizing a target. One of the most important things for being a good manipulator is the ability to notice the right people, the ability to pick the right targets. Well, sorry, there are no right targets. The truth is that everyone can be manipulated by a master, but it takes a lot of practice to become a master, and as such, for beginners like you, picking the easy or more susceptible targets is the smarter move. Generally speaking, the easiest people to manipulate are usually those with low self-esteem, low confidence, or other form of insecurities. These traits usually manifest in numerous forms, and it is these forms you have to be trained to notice. Naivete. This is a very popular draw for manipulation because the victim is almost never aware that he or she possesses such a trait, and this limits the possibility that they will eventually discover you. It could be noticed clearly in people who always strive to see the best in others. Such a person, even when confronted with the idea and even evidence of manipulation, is likely to still believe everything is a coincidence and should have another explanation. This is definitely one you should look out for. Emotional dependence. People who exhibit this trait are almost always in relationships, and such relationships are almost always ending. Why is this? Because their happiness depends on the happiness of others, and due to this, they could be considered needy. But their neediness is to your advantage. These sorts of people would do anything to keep you happy, even if it goes against their best interests, and the best thing is, they do it quite willingly. This would mean little effort from you and an almost servile target. The only caveat to this type of person is that they are mostly always the jealous types. Be careful. Low self-confidence. If you have ever met someone with low self-confidence, you'd agree with me that they are always seeking validations of their actions and decisions, and these tend to expose them to manipulation. As a manipulator, your power over this class of people lies in your approval and the way you use it. Withholding such an approval makes them eager to please, and giving them the approval makes them happy, relaxed, and ripe for the taking. Pseudo-manipulators. Have you ever met people who like to feel like they are the smartest and most powerful in the room? If yes, this is their class. People like this usually feel like they can prey on others and are good manipulators, but in truth are nothing but failures. They are very hard to find, but if you ever meet such a person who acts out manipulative tendencies but possesses no real influence on people, you have your mark. The way to handle such people is to play the victim or subordinate and strive to avoid doing their wishes while making sure they do yours. This might involve a whole lot of acting and a few concessions at the beginning, but would definitely be worth the hassle at the end. These people are mostly narcissists and are easy to pick out using this very trait. Lack of assertiveness. These kinds of people do not have the ability to make up their mind, and this is a weakness to take advantage of. You should strive to play the role of bully or higher authority, someone who makes decisions for them, provided you play up your best decisions while hiding your worst. You're bound to stay in their lives and stay in control. Altruism. This is one of those traits that are present in people who show a high level of honesty, fairness, and empathy, emphasis on the empathy. This is the emotion to go after, as it blinds the target to your true nature and makes him more likely to buy into your act. This makes he or she susceptible to your talents, but not foolish, so you'd still have to play your cards right to have the desired impact. There are many other traits to look out for, and with time and experience, you'd discover them. Looking closely, you would notice that at least one of these traits is present in everyone you know. This is the reason why everyone, even yourself, can be manipulated, and as such, while playing your game, never drop your guard, and always be on the lookout in case your target is also playing a game on you. I should also add that while these traits make people more susceptible to manipulation, your abilities and skills are the factors that would truly determine if the manipulation would be successful or not. Warning signs. Everybody can be manipulated, but some people are less likely to fall than others. If you are a beginner and you're just learning the ropes, it is necessary for you to avoid individuals high up on the less likely list. To achieve this, you need to know the particular traits or character types to look out for. Such people are the stubborn. They are not impossible to break, but are better avoided because they might cost too much effort. Stubborn people are usually hard to manipulate because they have self-created opinions whose tenets they uphold strictly. Worse is the fact that they are prone to arguing a lot, and seeing as this is rather inherent in them, it is a trait you would have to figure a way around if you plan on sticking around. Except you are very confident you can get the job done. Steer clear. Insensitive people. This type lacks the ability to feel much in terms of empathy or sympathy. It only cares about their own interests. You might think that's a good thing, but remember, their well-being is most likely top of their worries, and any sign of manipulation is sure to set off alarm bells. Immature people. Immaturity is normally a trait that should set people out for manipulation because it is a close sibling of naivety. However, most immature people possess the ability to hold grudges for a tremendous period of time, and you do not want them hunting you down for hurting their feelings or stealing their properties. They tend to make very determined enemies. The stubborn also possess this tendency. People with close friends and relatives. The best targets are usually those who reside far away from most family and friends, because this reduces the chance of trusted outside forces trying to undo your work. Unless you can think of a way to wean your target off such influence, or at least factor them into your plans, the ploy is going to be extremely difficult to pull off, even if you are ready to manipulate the entire group. Ask yourself, is it worth the effort? Chapter 5. Persuasion. The psychological theories. Never fail to consider the target. Persuasion is a deliberate effort to change or alter a person's opinions, beliefs, or attitude towards a particular issue, situation, object, or person. This is usually achieved by transmission of a message, which could be verbal or symbolic. While persuasion could be used in a manipulative sense, it is in actual sense different from manipulation. This is because when persuading a person, he or she is usually aware of your efforts at changing their point of view, and willingly or reluctantly allows you to try. In this instance, the person listens and concentrates on what you're saying, and then tries to rationalize your ideas with reality, before then putting whatever conclusions they come to comparison with what they previously believed. Your role in the entire dynamic is to state your reasons for the change you're prescribing, give illustrations and evidence supporting your views, and try to convince the target of your advances that your line of action or advice is their best bet. The main goal of this is getting them to switch to a state of reasoning or a product that you prefer. It is in this that persuasion resembles manipulation, because your goal is still to push the target towards an outcome that they might ordinarily not have considered right. The success attained in persuasion usually depends on the preconceptions held by the target and their strength, their perception of the person sharing the new message or idea, their perception of the message or idea, and finally, their perception of the conclusion on offer. Upon outlining these reasons, it should be clear to you that the subject of your effort would probably possess ideas that are at least dissimilar, if not contradictory to yours, and as such, the entire process would either hinge on your persuasion being very convincing, or the ability of the target to meet a compromise between the conflicting ideas that would majorly mirror the changes you want. Below are 6 major theories that strive to explain the way the human mind absorbs and reacts to information. Knowledge of these would greatly increase the odds of persuasion if you could pinpoint it in your target. The attribution theory. This concludes that people would either attribute actions and characters to people and object respectively, either in relation to the context they are being considered in, or according to their own emotional disposition. When they attribute using context as a guide, they are likely to come to decisions that take into consideration environment of origin and situational factors, such as seen when a person refrains from calling a product inferior or calling a person insensitive, instead arguing that the product has been made from the best possible items available to the manufacturer, and that the person is simply reacting as he has learned to from his childhood environment. However, when considering their own emotional disposition, they tend to believe that whatever is convenient for them is the only right decision or approach for every other person. Consider this situation. You meet a person at an event or gathering and try starting a conversation with them, but instead of giving you a polite audience, the person appears preoccupied with their own thoughts or acts aloof. Angered and annoyed, you walk away, and when asked for an opinion on the person, you characterize them as proud, arrogant, or self-important. In this case, the characterization you have concluded on is based solely on your emotional disposition and does not take into consideration the situation or possible problems the other person might have. The idea is not to determine whether or not you are wrong or right, but rather to analyze how you are likely to process information about people and things. You actually might be right about the person. Another situation is when you have been accused of doing something wrong, and you claim that your accusers have failed to see things from your own perspective and are only interested in their own point of view. This is a perfect example of considering things as regards context. In this case, probably because the things said are negative, you'd notice the emphasis placed on contextual understanding of actions. There is also a slight hint of the dispositional thinking occurring simultaneously. The conditioning theory. In this case, the person is likely to do things if they are tailored and conditioned to look like their own decisions instead of as a result of coercion. This is most utilized in the advertising industry, where commercials, advertisements, and billboards are used to convey information that would provoke positive feelings in the population of interest. They then connect such feelings to their products, thus making you feel that the product would bring such a feeling into your life. Because of this, you are more likely to purchase their product, thinking all the while that your decision was an independent one. This is usually possible because we generally perceive things based on our emotions and are more likely to buy things because they make us feel good. The cognitive dissonance theory. Based on this theory, it is assumed that people tend to aim for consistency in their thoughts, attitudes, and decisions. This is the reason why most people create principles which they strive to follow. Most people also seem intent on reconciling the contradictions as much as they can until they feel comfortable. I would give 2 examples on this. Example 1. You have a very strong and deep-rooted need for canned food, either due to the laziness of having to cook meals or the frustration at having to wait in queues for food. Then you're told that such canned meals could lead to cancer, and you definitely don't want to have cancer. But you also don't want to stop eating canned food. So instead of stopping with the habit, you comfort yourself that millions of people like you have the same habit and would never have cancer. The cancer theory might be untrue, but your eagerness to dispute the fact, or at least to make the consequences seem less severe, is your own way of changing your mind, or at least making the facts you have just learned seem less important or true. This is one of the ways of dealing with cognitive dissonance theory. Example 2. Imagine a criminal with a conscience. This is probably hard to imagine, but they do exist. In such a situation, his or her criminal tendencies are clashing with their tender hearts and causing a bit of discomfort. Such a person is very likely dealing with his or her problems by giving in to the rationale that a criminal and wealthy life far outweighs the benefits of having a clean conscience or good heart. Again, I am refraining from judging whether such a rationale is sound, but am more focused on the fact that the person seems to give in to a rationale that overlaps with the general aim of most people to deal with his discomfort. This is another way of dealing with the cognitive dissonance. The judgment theory. This one is very simple to grasp. It simply proposes that when faced with a new piece of information or idea, a person's reaction is more or less dependent on the way he or she currently feels on the topic. What this means is that we are likely to accept something that resonates with our current belief, reject something that doesn't fit in with our beliefs, or stay indifferent to something never previously considered. Therefore, when attempting to persuade a person, it is better to first determine their views on the topic to gauge whether or not you'd be successful, and if your effort would eventually be worth it. Inoculation theory. The inoculation theory supports the view that even if previously uninterested in 2 points of view, once argued for, you are likely to pick the dominant point of view and stick with it. Here is an example of what I mean. You have never watched a game of soccer in your life, but one day you are relaxing on the beach and happen to find yourself stuck between 2 die-hard soccer fans who support rival teams. An argument begins about whose team is better and more dominant, and they both turn to you presenting their points like you are a seasoned fan, and after some time ask you to judge on who's better. You obviously would pick the person with the better argument, so as not to betray your own lack of knowledge on the subject. If in future another individual was to pose a question to you, inquiring as to which of those two teams is better, you'd probably find yourself arguing in favor of the choice you made then, maybe even with some of the same points that were used then. This is the power of inoculations. The most powerful initial idea always takes root first. Narrative persuasion theory. From experience, I think we would all accept that stories have a more enhanced effect on perception and opinions than abstract advice. The attitudes and opinions of people towards objects and others tend to change when they are told compelling stories of such subjects. The theory simply attempts to explain the heightened effect can have on people if utilized properly. In this, the listener feels transported, and this greatly affects their perception of events, making them more pronounced and vivid than they might have been if they had been expressed ordinarily and abstractly. The psychological perspective. Ordinarily, persuading people would be difficult without the ability to properly organize and present an argument. But if inexperience in any or both of this is coupled with an inability to gauge and understand moods and stances, your task would be made many times more likely to fail. The ability to instantly sense and recognize a person's stance on an issue is difficult, not to talk of performing the same trick on an audience. Because of this difficulty, most speakers who are attempting to introduce people to a new point of view always tend to ask questions that would enable them to gauge the stance of the audience before moving on with their presentation. Immediately after asking such questions, they usually watch out for visible reactions from members of the audience, maybe a smile to indicate a previous knowledge of the topic, sitting up to indicate interest, turning away, or sighing to indicate disagreement or boredom, or even a person willing to answer. These simple markers give you an idea as to how your message may be received and would help you map out a strategy of approach. It is also an effective tool, as people tend to express themselves more sincerely when they do not feel particularly in the spotlight. So if you're unsure, do not refrain from asking a few surface questions to test the waters, or more aptly, to feel out the crowd. It should also be noted that many people might give a negative reaction to one-on-one persuasion and would start arguments to further their points. The moment you realize that your attempt to persuade a particular person has deteriorated into an argument, it is advisable for you to walk away. Very few arguments occurring outside law courts ever get settled. Engaging in one would be fruitless and time-consuming. That time is better spent elsewhere. I stated earlier that manipulation is similar to persuasion, in that both aim to change opinions, attitudes, and actions from what they might have been to whatever you prefer. And I had also stated that they differ from one another in that persuasion is a more direct form of securing the change you desire, while manipulation requires you to operate in secret, using emotional exploitation. Now I would like to expatiate on the relationship between manipulation and persuasion, or rather how persuasion can be adopted as a tool for manipulators. This is not rocket science, and needs only a simple alteration in approach to persuasion. It would require you to couple the ability to make compelling, irrefutable arguments with your ability to recognize emotional markers. Once both are in sync, you are ready to move. But why this two? The answer to that is rather simple. If you recognize an emotion to be dominant in the target and feel the need to convince he or she to do something without outright manipulation, most likely due to the presence of friends and family, wouldn't it be better to play on such an emotion and use it as leverage or platform with which you propel your point of view rather than just riding in without a strategy? This is why persuasion makes manipulation look humane and might even reduce the noticeability of your ploy. It enables the manipulator, you, to touch on the emotions of a target for a reaction. But instead of making your telling moves under a shroud all the time, you adopt clever arguments and let them do the convincing for you. The trick, however, is to always get the emotion right. Chapter 6. Persuasion, the Practical. In the previous chapter, I touched upon persuasion as a whole, focusing on the definition, its differences and similarities with manipulation, as well as their relationship and how they could be adapted to work to your benefit as a manipulator. Other than that, the means by which the human mind absorbs and relates to new information and facts was also discussed. Now I wish to approach how the theories of information absorption can be used to your advantage in real-life situations. I want to give you practical tips on how to persuade people to do your bidding effectively. Putting the theories into practice. The theories from the previous chapter were very explanatory regarding how people are most likely to relate with information, but said very little about how to take advantage of their tendencies. This should give more detailed tips and tactics as to how the theories can be used maximally in real-life situations, as well as the groups of people most likely to possess each attribute. Use of the attribution theory. This theory manifests in all people, but is more noticeable in pseudo-manipulators or arrogant people. Such people are less likely to ever accept being wrong and are more likely to blame it on perspective instead. Here is an example on how to deal with such people. Your target is a pseudo-manipulator, one who likes to feel in control and powerful, and the roles in the relationship are already well defined. If, on a given occasion, such a person were to shut down your views in a bid to bully you into submission, you could use such an opportunity to play for something you need. Firstly, you have to avoid arguing your point for too long or too strongly. Always put up a little resistance to emphasize their power over you. Once he or she has lapsed into the role you want for them, ask them for tips on how to do what they want from you. Be sure to keep them talking, constantly asking questions, and subtly driving the conversation towards your need. When they are at their most vulnerable, they would be ready to do anything just to keep emphasizing their power. The thing about such targets is that they are convinced of their powers over you and believe themselves to be infinitely smarter. People who think themselves smart love nothing more than giving lectures, in which your only role is to listen and ask more questions. Once you have got them talking for an extended period, proceed to move them in your direction of interest, and when they appear to feel at their most powerful, they are likely to grant it without too much consideration, much like the kings of old. Use of the conditioning theory. In a real-life situation, this theory involves using your wit and humor to flatter the target into believing whatever you want them to. It also makes them more likely to consider your suggestions. This follows the general principle that you would aim to acquire more of what pleases you, and in this case, who? A typical example is the confident guy who prides himself on being able to pick up a different girl every night. How does he do it? He simply wows and impresses them with a combination of humor, wit, an interesting conversation, and a smoothness and style that is very difficult to recreate. He basically makes them feel good for 5 minutes at the bar, and they believe he would make them feel equally as good for the entire night, and therefore happily follow him out. Though this works on almost everyone, naive people are bound to be more success. Use of the cognitive dissonance theory. This is a generally difficult theory to use because the onus is usually on the targets to make all the difference on their lives. But if properly played, and you act as the advisor and close friend who gives the alternative idea or compromise that helps them deal with their dissonance, it makes you a sort of confidant. This gives you a choice position in their lives, as from their point of view, you understand them more than any other person. This is, however, the sort of relationship that must be cultivated for a period of time before making your move. Use of the judgment theory. People rich in self-confidence, arrogant, and who consider themselves smarter than most tend not to listen to or take into consideration arguments of others that are contradictory to their own views. If such people are to be persuaded, the new opinions they are to be inoculated with have to be similar to their previous ones, or else all hopes of persuading them would be impossible. If you are to ever convince them that what they believe is wrong or inferior to yours, you need to make it feel that acceptance is their idea and not a necessity. The first step would be to pander to them, to defer slightly to their intelligence. Next, you draw similarities between your idea and theirs. When it comes to convincing, you are better served by an indirect approach where you ask questions and wait for them to answer before gently expressing your objections, making sure to always be gentle and let their thought processes do the job of convincing them. It could be a change of opinion or a need to persuade them that a course of action better serves their interests. This method is sure to soften them up better than arguing with them. Consider that friend who sees himself or herself as an authority on every subject, regardless of how little knowledge they actually possess on the issue, and remember how such people almost never back out of arguments, but instead keep going at it till the environment of the discussion becomes toxic. We have all had this kind of friendship, and the mistake of arguing with them even makes it harder for them to ever change their views. This is because once they have taken a public stance on an opinion, it is difficult for them to ever take another or even act against what they have supported, even if they later see more sense in your own view. This is because going back on their belief is against their sense of pride and their ego. Thus, persuading such people is better done in private, if anything, because it gives you a chance to try again if you fail the first time. It also gives them a chance to adopt your idea in public without looking weak or stupid. Use of the inoculation theory. This is easy to utilize because almost everyone is susceptible to this. The key is making sure the person has no previous beliefs or opinions on the issue at hand. That is the only criterion. Once you are sure of this, you explain to them the advantages of your views. Never forget to also share the disadvantages, but do this in a way that it doesn't affect the message you want them to have. The reason why the disadvantages must be made clear is that if they associated what you have explained to them with lies later along the line, they are very likely to change their views as a whole. So, if you need such people for the long term, make sure they have the full gist. Always emphasize the advantages and play down the disadvantages, but never conceal them. This is as such less a matter of persuading a person as it is initiating belief in them. For this reason, knowledge and utilization of this theory could be very powerful in the right situations. Such a situation is when you find yourself pitching a unique and previously utilized business idea in a meeting, or when trying to preach a new doctrine, be it religious, academic, or technological. Use of the narrative persuasion theory. The power of stories is well known. If you doubt it, all you have to do is think about how evangelists and religious clerics preach their messages. Are you getting the idea now? Though I should probably say that these clerics are probably among the most trained person in the art of persuasion, because at one point they make use of so many theories of persuasion, constantly changing their tactics to better fit your fears and worries. But enough with the clerics. The narrative persuasion theory is perhaps the most effective at persuading people because it involves giving them a story, a character that they could relate to, and then relying on that story to do your convincing. Such a story might be true, or if you're very talented, made up. It really doesn't matter, as long as you can get them to listen. It might not work every time when used alone, but if you were to mix it up with other theories, just like the clerics, the chances of success are better. Other techniques of persuasion. Persuasion, like manipulation, possesses guidelines on how best to achieve your aim. These guidelines could be treated as strategies or tactics and would increase your chances of success the more you get used to them. The faster, the better. Use of force. The use of force or aggression could be effective or not, and more often than not, it is a win or nothing tactic. It involves not a lot of coaxing, but a lot of demanding. And as such, if the person or audience doesn't dig the vibe, there is no other means of retreating. It usually involves use of statements that sound threatening and would most likely be a good fit for dealing with people with low self-confidence and sense of self-worth. Also note that if the idea is to impress friends and family of your target, it would be better if this tactic were used in private beyond the hearing or view of other parties, as it could easily be perceived as bullying. Commitment and consistency. These are highly respected values in the minds of most people in all walks of life. When coupled with a little bit of success, it could be very effective, if not the most effective means of persuasion. If you want someone to believe your way is gold, and your opinions are equally as rich, there is no better way than providing an example of their successes. In most cases, the best example is usually yourself. Showing commitment to your ideas and consistently applying them successfully tends to convince people of their truthfulness. It eliminates the need for you to continue arguing your points regularly. Instead, let them persuade themselves that following your example is the right thing. It would be like seeing a successful person and emulating them in hopes that you'd achieve their level of success the same way. We all do it, so why not use it to our advantage when dealing with others? Another angle to this could be to get the target to commit themselves to promises or writing. This would be useful because most people care about reputations and rarely want to be seen going back on their words. While this second angle would be an effective tool on arrogant people and pseudo-manipulators, the first method is more likely to work for people lacking in confidence and self-esteem. Social influence. Social influence could manifest in one of two ways. It could be positive or negative. Positive influence would point to the need for one to follow the convention, or approach that is the most common around him or her or among friends. The negative influence, on the other hand, deals with the tendency of people to act against the norm. The influence that is expressed is usually deep-rooted and expresses itself in more than one fact of the target's life. Once the target's tendency has been established, you could move to surround the person only with people who possess the approach that would produce the result you desire. This method is also applicable to people with a low sense of self-esteem and confidence. Action by reciprocity. Reciprocity generally means the need or tendency to give back when you are given something. You're probably wondering how this affects persuasion, right? This is straightforward. Giving something creates the need in the target to give back. This in turn is a weakness that makes the target more susceptible to catering to a need that they otherwise could have overlooked. This is also applicable to arrogant people, as well as those who possess altruistic dispositions. An empathetic person is also likely to fall for such a ruse. This could also be used or claimed to be used subliminally, as most times you need not even state the need verbally or outrightly, but instead subtly imply to its absence. Use of authority or sternness. If the target is a naive person or one who is lacking in decisiveness or assertiveness, this is the ideal method of approach. This is for people who are prone to listening to other people's opinions and taking it for the truth, especially when they consider the person to be more of an authority on the subject than they are. It would also help if they consider your views trustworthy and knowledgeable. This is the method of choice when dealing with a new or junior colleague, or at least someone who is new to an environment and is not yet well versed in how things operate. However, treating such people could also be counterproductive, causing them to view you in a negative light. Taking advantage of love. It might be a simple crush or a big attraction, but people almost always say yes to people they like and feel something positive for. So if you have a target that you feel is attracted to you, play their feelings to your advantage and ask for whatever you want. Just be careful to give a little back, and do not overdo it. If the person is emotionally dependent on you, your luck is strong, because they are even less likely to utter a word for fear of losing you to another. The best part is that they never realize that such is happening, as it is a very natural reaction. Leveraging your trust and integrity. If you are generally acknowledged to be trustworthy, you are more likely to be believed. This could be done by smartly showing off your impeccable reputation, if you have one, while avoiding the line of arrogance. That could spoil the effect. Another way to use this tactic is to put your character in the spotlight, if you have a good one, and making sure to back up your every point with a vow of assurance in its trustworthiness. The last is to give a sense of expertise, show that you possess more knowledge than they do, and when added to your reputation and character, you have a cocktail of persuasion that even the most steadfast of non-believers would reconsider. It is also likely to work on naive people and people who consider themselves intellectual. Making use of sympathy and empathy. These two emotions can easily be manipulated because they usually convey on their owners a sense of innocence and docility that can be used against them. With the right words and gestures, you should be able to convince such people of anything. For a more advanced effect, make use of stories, as such people are also prone to following the narrative transportation theory, and the combination of these two factors make them better candidates to believe than most. Reverse psychology. Reverse psychology is a technique of persuasion where a speaker or person utilizes a behavior or idea that is contradictory to that which he wants to occur. The use of this technique does or asks for the opposite of what they actually require of the target, encouraging the target to do as they wish. This works on people who make a habit of resisting authority. If tried on people who are more agreeable, they might, and would probably, do as you have asked. For this reason, they do not make good candidates or targets for reverse psychology to be used upon. However, even when used with resistant people, reverse psychology should be used as subtly as possible, because no one enjoys or likes being manipulated, and as such, If they recognize what you're doing, it is likely you would not achieve much with them. An example of the use of reverse psychology is advising someone to do something when you know that the very idea of the advice infuriates him or her and would probably push them towards doing the opposite. The idea is usually to establish the idea you actually want them to absorb, then play it up subtly to become tempting, before changing track and arguing against it. Immediately after this, you push them to make a decision, and that's all. It is likely they would go with it because, other than the fact that they would want to resist the advice, it is also the idea that they were exposed to first. It is not necessary to take such steps if you know the person well enough to understand what they like, dislike, and how they would react in given situations. Remember to always analyze before making your move. The reason why most people fail in persuading people into a line of action is that they fail to grasp what is necessary for their success, and if they do, they fail to take it all into consideration. It is for this same reason that persuading strangers is more difficult than persuading people you are closer to. Because if you were to ignore a person's emotional disposition and shelf their possible reactions, it would be the same as approaching a stranger. To really succeed at persuasion, most times you might need to adopt maybe a dominant, authoritative attitude, or a more reserved one. When being authoritative, you have to give off a vibe of knowledgeability and confidence. You must convince the person that you know what you're speaking about, while emphasizing their own knowledge. There is a loophole here. If this is tried on a resistant person, he or she is likely to do the opposite of what you advise, and thus fall a victim of reverse psychology. You see, that knowledge of the person is important in determining the best technique for persuasion, for without it, you would be charging blindly. You should also avoid using reverse psychology very often, as such misuse could expose your tricks and make the target more immune to your ministrations. It could be particularly damaging to relationships, and you do not want this, unless that in itself is your goal. If you are to use reverse psychology, always remember to stay smart and stay calm. Do not let your emotions control you, but, just like in manipulation, control your emotions. Persuasion is an art that all socially influential people crave possession of. This is because the ability to make people do as you wish, and while you can directly manipulate individuals, it becomes trickier when dealing with groups of people. But if you were to master this art, your power and influence would benefit greatly. Chapter 7. Common Manipulation Techniques. At a point in our life, and at least once daily for most, we resort to manipulation to get what we want. It could be a little lie to get out of a tight spot, or harmless flattery to get yourself a choice seat, but it is manipulation. So stop believing that manipulation is an art reserved only for the evilest of people. Everyone does it, so it's simply better to get very good at it. Though it is better to look out for some traits that predispose some to manipulation more than others, it doesn't mean that people without such traits can't be played. I have previously elaborated on such traits as well as other means of gaining control over people. But it's time to approach the real topic of discussion: how to manipulate people. Lying. This is the most popular of all manipulation techniques. On its own, lying is simply misinforming the target, or at the most, concealing information from the target, but when done with a view to controlling people, it becomes a pretty powerful weapon. Consider lying as a tool to soften up a target that has, until that moment, proven too strong. Lying in this way would require one to betray the very intent of conventional lying, because in this case, you're not trying to misinform or conceal, but rather to confuse. If you are to succeed at this, your lies need to be believable and contradictory at first. At the beginning of such a ploy, it is necessary for your lies to constantly bounce off each other, creating a means through which you could sow seeds of confusion in someone who is usually sure of themselves. Consider lying to a partner about a past relationship. Then, in a later discussion on a similar topic, drop a previously thought-of slip-up that contradicts the first experiences you shared with them. The target might not notice this at first, and may require a few more similar lies before the inconsistencies start to call their attention. But when it does, instead of defending yourself, clam up and play the victim. Tell a sob story about emotional pain and all of that. Share with them the reason for your lies. The stories and reasons might be fictitious, but the more realistic the better. So be sure to think everything through first. In this sort of scenario, the initial contradicting lies are needed to throw a seemingly strong person off balance. There is nothing like a perfect person or a truly balanced person, and as such, regardless of how strong we might seem on the outside, we all have weaknesses, and there is no better way to start the process of exposing someone's emotional vulnerabilities than forcing them to instigate a heart-to-heart moment or discussion. If you were to try creating such a moment on your own, the target would still be likely to stay closed. However, if such a discussion is their idea, whatever barriers they possessed, they would have brought down by themselves. That is the goal with this lie. It puts you in a position to change the narrative. In a situation in which the power was previously balanced in most of your relations, making yourself seem weak or vulnerable could put the target in an uncomfortable position and force them into opening up to adapt to their new role. Just be sure to keep any contradictory lies out of your final story. While this might not bring you much in terms of favors, having them believe you opened up on some deep secret to them strengthens their attachment. They feel a stronger bond has been formed. This trick is likely to work on people who are emotionally secure and need to believe you are really open with them before they can open up. Punishment. When I say punishment, I do not mean physical abuse or violence. No. I mean resorting to tactics like the silent treatment, nagging, shouting, or mood swings. I know you're probably thinking how any of these behaviors could get you any control. But if you learn to selectively release such emotions and actions at the right time, they could exert just the right effect on the target. The silent treatment, for example, could be used to put the right person in a state of wanting to please you. This treatment is a popular one for manipulators when dealing with assertive people, as well as people with low self-confidence. In such case, you create a fictional quarrel in your head that need not have happened in reality. All it needs to be is believable and offensive from your perspective. Then follow through with the silent treatment. When the target gets desperate to get you back to your former self, drop the act and ask for whatever you wish for. This is a direct technique that might not always work, but for a beginner, it is worth a try. And for an expert, if partnered with the right set of skills and ploys, its chances of success become better. Remember when you were little and your parents tried keeping you away from the candy or cookie jar, and instead of throwing a tantrum and crying, you just stalked back to your room, threw the sheets over your head, and refused to talk to anybody? You wait for hours, determined not to make the first move. And later at night your parents come into the room bearing gifts and treats and maybe even the promise of a trip you want. Not all children did this, but Most did, and yes, children manipulate too. They might not recognize it for what it is, but they actually do it. And since it works, they keep resorting to it again and again. The best thing about such a ploy is, at the exact instance during which it occurs, the target believes that they are doing the right thing to keep you happy and keep the relationship from dying. If nagging were to be the strategy of choice for you, be sure the target is either one who lacks assertiveness or one who is eager to please, because such people are likely to react favorably to nagging. Let's say you want something badly. All you have to do is keep asking and asking until they give in. Due to their lack of assertiveness, through all the asking, they would probably never give you an outright no for an answer. And if it is a target who is always eager to please, he or she would have begun considering the pros and cons from the second time you ask, and with just a little extra push, they would cave. Mood swings are another very effective strategy in unbalancing a target. They are just more negative than lying, and if utilized, care has to be taken to avoid dwelling too much or for too long on negative emotions, such as anger. Rather, it would be better to spend more time in a neutral state of boredom or indifference. The trick behind utilizing mood swings is to make your target associate some actions of theirs with particular moods of yours. This would give them an idea about what you like and dislike without uttering a word. It is thus advised to use this tactic alongside a more reserved attitude. Imagine your roommate tends to leave their dishes undone after a meal. You do something drastic, like throwing such plates in the trash, and then refrain from talking much about it for that night. But when you wake the next morning, you adopt a light-hearted demeanor and refuse to lower the smile, regardless of what he or she does. The next time your roommate invites someone over without informing you, and you act in a similar way, you never let your reactions slip over into the next day. And other than when the target does something you find offensive, never react in such a way. Always make sure that you do this only rarely. Depending on the type of person your roommate is, he or she would react differently. If the person is naive or lacking in self-esteem, they would pander to you and fail to repeat whatever it is you reacted to. But if the person is insensitive, your reactions would probably not do the trick, and you would have to resort to another tactic. Sarcasm and flattery. While other techniques mentioned earlier have dealt with manipulation using actions and acting, if you're good with words, this is a more likely weapon for you. The power of words is often under-exaggerated in favor of actions. However, if mastered, they could be just as useful, if not more. Sarcasm and flattery are two slightly contrasting techniques that could be used to control the actions and opinions of people. They are usually most effective on someone who lacks self-esteem. Such a person is likely to believe most negative and positive things you say about them and start working to please you. Because of this, you could use sarcasm to deliver well-planned put-downs whenever such a person offends you, only to resort to flattery to increase their confidence. Such polarity on such a weak mind means they would cling to you for the compliments and flattery and would start doing things only to please you, even if it goes against their own needs. The applications of sarcasm and flattery lose all or at least most of their effectiveness if they are blatantly employed. To avoid these, you must understand the need for subtlety. In the case of sarcasm, the very idea is for you to be blatant in your execution, while subtly hiding your goal. You must make whatever comment you deem fit without making the target feel as if you're directing them towards a particular line of action. Failing at this could have the alternate effect of making them immune to you. When you were young, you probably associated bullies with violence, shoving people into lockers and all. But you should be able to point out that person who always alternated in behavior, showing you his or her good parts on one day, only to switch it up the next. The person would have been so polarizing that people were often confused about whether they loathed or loved him or her, and with time would start to find that they hovered around such people, trying to cater to their every need. Do you recognize them now? You probably had a few in your high school, and most times they were really popular. Two of the most effective tactics employed by those people were sarcasm and flattery. With subtle swipes of their tongues, they could play down your happiest moment or your biggest achievement to be something worthless, and in the next, they could make you feel of one of your more ordinary actions seem spectacular. As much as they hurt your feelings, you'd still find yourself doing things they would find pleasing whenever they were around. This might have happened to you, and it might not have, but the very fact that it happened to some speaks volumes of the effectiveness of such tactics. So never forget to destabilize a mark using sarcasm and flattery. Another advantage of these two techniques is that they keep you from having to resort to trickier, aggressive, or abusive techniques when slight words and gestures would do the trick perfectly. Isolation. This is mostly a secondary tactic used to make sure no external forces mess with your manipulation. The presence of family and friends around the target provide an extra level of insulation or protection around the target, as such people tend to call the target back on some of their actions when they get suspicious. Their presence there, whispering into the ear of the mark, thus creates another source of influence besides yours, whose sole purpose is to thwart your influence. Whenever you get the target to fulfill a need for you, such people would call he or she back and try to expose how you are manipulating them, and that puts the ploy you have implemented in jeopardy. On its own, isolation is not that effective, but it is worth noting that in the absence of friends and family alike, the target starts to look on to you as their only source of advice, comfort, love, help, etc. In other words, they become completely dependent on you emotionally, and this heightens the level of control you possess over them. This, in turn, makes them easier to influence. Guilt-tripping and love-bombing. These two are a very common duo used by manipulators, but that doesn't in any way affect their effectiveness. Guilt-tripping is when you manipulate your target's reactions, making them feel guilty about doing particular things simply by playing on their emotional vulnerabilities. Naturally, guilt is a very uncomfortable feeling, which most people strive to eliminate. This need to eliminate their guilt after an incident is what you should aim to take advantage of. Since such chances might be few and far between, the initiative to create situations that give you a platform on which you could leverage a person's guilt against them is on you. In such a case, the understanding of your target's emotions and what makes them tick come into play. You need to know how you can make them feel guilty so as to take advantage of them and their guilt. Consider a situation in which a partner or girlfriend refuses to accompany you to a company gathering. If the gathering is not important to you, you could clam up and use a mood swing to leverage them for something that is. But if you consider the gathering too important to miss, or you need a +1 to impress a particular attendee, and your partner is refusing, you could play the guilt card, making them feel selfish and unkind for not considering your needs. You would make yourself the victim, putting your partner in an awkward position where they feel like they're depriving you of something you need for their own selfish reason. When this is used on less assertive people or people lacking in self-confidence, the result is usually stunning, as more often than not, they end up doing exactly what you want. They might even outperform your expectations simply because of their need to eliminate the feelings of guilt you have created in them. Using such a tactic, you rile up someone that loves or is attached to you by telling them and claiming that they do not care or are too selfish in the way they treat you. This would keep an emotionally vulnerable person in check, making them see you as the victim of their actions rather than the other way around. They would then be eager to prove your claims wrong, thus increasing in them the need to please. Love bombing, on the other hand, is a technique in which you continuously and over an extended period of time shower a person with love, impressing them with charm, while getting whatever you want from them. This is usually much difficult to tell apart from real love, and that's what makes the mark even more vulnerable. Love bombing is effective on almost everyone, because as humans, we all love to feel good, and this need drives our selection of the people we hang out with. If someone makes us feel loved and cared for, we impulsively strive to spend more time with them. This would also mean that the target would feel more inclined to satisfy your need in order to maintain his or her happiness. However, like most tactics, the effect of love bombing is more pronounced in some character types. What this means is that, depending on the level of love bombing you expose a target to, some would see it as a result of you trying to be nice and would consider you a good friend, while others would see your actions as more and would consider you as more than a friend. Individually, love bombing and guilt tripping are effective, but when combined, they are devastating. I am yet to explain reinforcement, but the effect they produce is quite similar. To achieve such an effect, you should probably expose the target to your loving and charming side. Make the effort of your love felt. Then, when the moment is right, you withdraw it and leave the target craving for it. The next step is to up the ante by making them feel guilty about your withdrawal. You make them feel like your current mood and state is their fault, and when you feel that they are ripe and ready to accommodate your whims and needs, you slowly slip back into the role of loving and caring for them. Most of the time this works, and its success is because every time you put both ploys in play, you create a sort of hypersensitivity to your needs and wants in the target. You get them into a state where all they want to do is return to the period of time when all you did was love them and charm them. You might also resort to completely playing the victim, just to make the target more uncomfortable and guiltier, softening them up for whatever it is that you actually want of them. This is the technique used by con men and women who want to take advantage of vulnerable people and make some wealth for themselves in the process. They inveigle their ways into the lives of such people and then love bomb them to the point where the target cannot imagine an extended period of time without them and would, for that reason alone, do anything to keep them happy. Whenever they fail to get their way, they would then resort to guilt tripping in order to bring the target back into a state of mind in which their major thought would be on pleasing them. It might seem odd and unbelievable, but if you think about it long enough, you'd realize that these two are the most used techniques by gold diggers and emotional swindlers. Reinforcement. This technique is easy to understand, but hard to actually apply, and as such is better learned by trial and error. In this ploy, you provide the target with whatever he or she wants, be it money, gifts, sex, or companionship, provided it is within your capability. And after the person grows accustomed to having what you give them, you begin the process of constantly withdrawing and providing them with these, constantly keeping them on their toes and making them more vulnerable with you. The major trick here is figuring out what the target wants, what makes them tick, or what most tickles their ego. You have to identify that weakness that everyone has and reinforce it. It might be praise and recognition the person desires. Give it to them. It might be money and gifts. Give it to them. It might be sex or prestige. Give it to them. But whenever you feel they are not conforming to your whims, or are not taking care of your needs, or are even daring to take you for granted, withdraw all that you have given to them, and in a bid to get it all back, they would come groveling and begging. After the first time, they would probably learn to satisfy your every want if they don't want you withdrawing your reinforcement. For example, there is at least a smidgen of materialism in all of us, and this can be taken advantage of. If you meet a lady whose weakness lies in her love of material possessions, and you have the money to spend, you are in luck. All you have to do is charm her, take her on a few shopping trips, spend your money on her, and basically reinforce her love of material things. Upon every reinforcement, try upping the ante on the things you ask of her. You could start with insisting she spend more time with you, insisting she accompany you to any event you wish, and with time, you could try asking her or commanding her to stay over whenever you like. To keep up the supply of riches, love for which you have reinforced her, she would most likely conform to your needs, or at least beg for a reprieve rather than reject you. But if she seems to take your kindness for granted, kick her to the curb and withdraw your reinforcement. She is likely to come back hat in hand, apologizing for her behavior, and eager to please. Not to restrict this to only your love life, this technique could also be applied to almost any setting, including business, family relationships, and any case in general, provided there exists a means by which you reinforce the individual or group involved. If you think about it, you would notice that there really is little difference between this and parents who threaten to ground you and take away your freedom unless you behave as they wish, or businessmen who pull out of deals with established customers in the hope of pushing them into making desperate, unfavorable deals that would benefit them. In the case of the parents, they have reinforced your love of freedom by allowing you to do the things you like most of the time. This, when coupled with our inherent need to be free, makes us eager to please them anytime they threaten to take that freedom away. Couple the love for freedom with the fact that they are your providers of everything you need, and you would see that they have quite the hold on you. As I implied earlier, manipulation is rife in the world, and silently hoping for an ideal world in which it doesn't exist would make no difference. It is better you wisen up and get better at it than others before you are taken on a ride. I left this as the last technique on my list because there is a possibility, or rather, an inevitable reaction that you always have to take into consideration when dealing with people. This is ingratitude, or sometimes boredom. People tend to take for granted things they have all the time, and over a long period of time, they are bound to get bored. To avoid this, you would need to be very good at utilizing multiple techniques at various times on the same target. This ingratitude or boredom is most likely to occur when reinforcement is used, and to counter this reaction, you must understand that whatever you're reinforcing in the target could make them take you for granted. Because of this, you must always be ready to withdraw your reinforcement, not only when they misbehave, but also when you like to. This sounds mean and selfish, and it actually is. But you need to know that for reinforcement to work, you need to be selfish. You have to make the target see your needs as being more important than theirs, and to successfully do this, selfishness is necessary. The target needs to know that your efforts at making them feel good come at a price, and the price is anything you want in return. Thus, being nice doesn't cut it here. You need to be mean sometimes to truly make it work for you. Manipulation is not always for the faint-hearted. Manipulation is not always wrong, nor is it always right. But one thing that can be agreed upon is that it leaves an effect on both the user and the target. Depending on how manipulation was used, the effect might be positive or negative. Manipulation is usually used as a means of harming, subduing, or using a person, usually in a way that benefits the manipulator, mostly at the expense of the target. The negative effects of manipulation are not experienced by the victim alone, and in most cases, the users are not aware of the negative effects their behavior is having on their lives, and thus become victims of their own manipulation. One of the problems of manipulation is the transfer or possession of power. Power is naturally very addictive and very corrupting. So when faced with the question of what to use the power you have over people for, people tend to think about their selfish needs and how to make them happen. The idea of having power over a group of people or person is tempting, and when such power is gotten, it can lead to complete subordination and even abuse. While that is an effect on the victim, the user of such power might also become dependent on it, thus making it difficult for them to have any sort of relationship with anybody unless they have power to exert. This can be damaging, both psychologically and emotionally, in the long run. Chapter 8. Mastering the Art of Subtlety. Do not be blatant. If manipulation isn't subtle, it probably wouldn't be effective. The very idea of manipulation thrives on the ability to subtly plant ideas, thoughts, and opinions in the mind of the target, and frame it in such a way that they believe that such ideas are the best they could come up with, or the right thing to do. Subtlety is necessary because the target has to feel that your every action is natural and actually not intended to influence them. This would mean that you first have to reduce the frequency with which you manipulate them. Manipulating them would mean reacting regularly in a negative way to what they do. This might seem unnatural to the target and could even lead them into believing that you're always trying to push on their buttons, which, by the way, you are. The ability to be subtle is as important as the ability to read emotions, because subtlety makes your knowledge of their emotions and reactions remain unknown to them. Being blatant in the way you manipulate a person would also draw the attention of other people, such as friends and family. And in all honesty, there is hardly a better way to put your manipulation of a target in jeopardy than exposing them to the influence of their family and friends. The simple secret to being subtle is to keep your judgments to yourself and keep your actions and reactions as cool and as undetectable as possible. The cautious approach is always best. Regardless of how vulnerable a target might seem, or how susceptible to manipulation they might look from a distance, it is necessary for you to approach the idea of manipulating a person cautiously. It isn't ever something to jump into, just because of the possibility that the manipulation could be successful. Cautiousness has to extend to all areas of the manipulation, from the planning to the approach and everything in between. This is especially important when dealing with strangers or people with whom you haven't spent that much time with. The emotions of such people are usually difficult to follow, even for the experts, and as such, it is better to proceed with utmost caution at first and consolidate on the little progress you make. The same thing applies when dealing with people you know, because even though the chances of you getting it wrong is very slim, it still exists, and for this reason, you have to consider your actions before going on with them. Otherwise, you risk destroying your relationships. Another problem with throwing caution to the wind is that it exposes your tactics and your goal to the target. While some people might just cut you loose and move on with their lives, others might feel the need to expose you to a dose of your own medicine. Such people would probably try to manipulate you in return with a view at causing you pain. So, if the need to succeed does not make you cautious, maybe thinking about your own well-being does the trick. A flimsy ploy is ineffective. Other than the ability to actually go through with the manipulation, another thing to pay attention to is the solidity of the ploy. This consists of details such as the rightness of the strategy to be utilized as regards the emotional and psychological disposition of the target, as well as the situation in which you find yourself in. The technique applied always has to seem like a natural reaction to whatever situation you find yourself in. If the reaction is unnatural, the ploy might still work out, but if looked at closely, what you're doing would become more visible to the target, and more so to outsiders who lack the emotional dependence the target has for you. For this reason, no matter who the target is, or how long the relationship has been going on for, you always need to make sure that the manipulation is foolproof, and that no one is the wiser to your plans. Scouting out the right target and putting the right approach into play would be useless if the general ploy is easily seen through. The ploy has to consist of you yourself, the image you're portraying to the target, how the role you are playing interacts with your actions, and most importantly, the fluidity of the entire ploy. If any of this is found lacking, or for some reason the various elements are found to be out of sync with one another, the chances of success reduce considerably. Never get ahead of yourself. The ability to keep yourself on track and put your mind to the task even when things are going well for you is an important attribute in every facet of life. Regardless of how well the relationship might be for you at a particular time, or how much the manipulation is serving your interests, never ever lose track of yourself. A loss of concentration could manifest in many ways. It could be a tendency for you to lose hold of your target, a need to avoid subtlety, or the urge to fast-track a ploy. Any of these is risky, as it exposes you to a better chance of failure, which in turn could lead to a complete breakdown of your plan. You must always stay alert to your surroundings and the reactions of your target to them. You must never fail to recognize how a situation affects a target, or else you risk losing them prematurely. Never go all out unless subtlety is a rule most manipulators always conform to. The ones who choose to not obey this are often less successful, and when they succeed, their success is usually short-lived. We have established the need for secrecy and subtlety, but there are times when being subtle is disadvantageous or not as effective as being blatant. In these cases, you are advised to apply the needed pressure where necessary. The ability to recognize when a situation requires more pressure than finesse, as well as the best way to deliver such pressure is one garnered through experience and failure. Situations that could call for the application of pressure are numerous, but you must be able to determine if the pressure is actually necessary and how to apply it. One such situation is the need to keep a target when you feel they are slipping away. For example, you have been working a target for a while. You have done everything by the book, maintaining isolation, staying on guard, and generally looking out for any potential spoilers while getting what you want from the target. Then in comes an old friend who is not so charmed by you. This friend goes on the attack, trying to pull the target from your clutches, and you have really worked to get to this point. You don't want to stop now. Then, to bring your target back, you do something drastic, like proposing marriage. This is the sort of pressure I am talking about. In such a situation, you would agree that all other more subtle methods might and probably had already failed under such a spirited assault from the friend. But instead of pulling out and walking away, you do the one thing that would express your desperation to keep the target close to you. Saying this here makes it look like showing desperation is a bad thing. But from the point of view of the target, it convinces them of the truthfulness of your affection. If such a friend truly suspected of manipulation, she would have most likely used your avoidance of true commitment to prove her point, and such an act would completely vilify their views and opinions in the eye of the target. Chapter 9. Practical Uses of Manipulation. Manipulation as a tool is quite versatile, as it does not particularly have any situations that it is restricted to. What this means is that, as long as people are involved in whatever you are involved in, be it a business setting, a relationship, or whatever, manipulation can be used to further your agenda. Manipulation in business. The knowledge of manipulation and persuasion is critical if you plan to avoid being drawn into office politics not of your making, or if you're out to avoid being cheated or railroaded by superiors and colleagues alike. Also, in business settings, there is a need for members of the same organization or group to confirm their views with one another and influence each other to cater to the group's interests. The ability to persuade people that your point of view is best would be quite handy in such a scenario. Salespeople also need to be well-versed in the arts because most times they deal with people who believe them to be swindlers, and for that reason they need to manipulate the person's perception of them, creating a positive one, before they could then begin the process of persuading such a customer to try out their products. There are some informal rules to follow when practicing manipulation in such business settings. 1. Don't push the limits. When I say limits, I do not mean yours. I mean that of the people you are manipulating. One of the ways that people push the limit is by trying to manipulate everyone every time. While this might work effectively in a relationship, in an organization, everyone watches everyone closely, and being associated with a tendency to manipulate people does not do your credibility much good. You have to be smart enough and disciplined enough to refrain from doing anything unless it is important. You have to always pick your battles well. If you overdo it, and people start to view you as a manipulator, they start to monitor your every move, and even the most mundane of your actions become an object of intense scrutiny. Such scrutiny would make it a whole lot more difficult for you to achieve anything when it truly matters. 2. Sharpen your senses. Senses, in this sense, mean the ability to listen and to watch others. In a business setting, the ability to listen and perceive the disposition of others and so, when possible, say nothing, take a back seat and let others have the floor. Due to the fact that everybody in such a setting is always trying to get ahead of the next, it would be better if you could discern their strategies and goals, and there is no better way to achieve that by putting yourself in a position to hear and see everything. 3. Create a connection. Be it a customer or a colleague, you have to build a connection with them. Most people make the mistake of believing that they only need to build connections with their bosses, but this line of action would only serve to paint you as your boss's stooge and alienate you from your fellow workers. On the contrary, forging a bond with both your colleagues and your bosses would make them see you as more of a bridge and less of a stooge. Another need for such a connection is the fact that you're more likely to be in the position to influence the thoughts and opinions of people when they feel they have a connection with you than if they consider you a complete stranger. This is particularly important when you're pitching an idea to others, and its absence is the major reason why cold pitching is a very difficult trick to pull off. 4. Always stay neutral, when you can. In a business setting, neutrality should be your best strategy. Never take sides unless you have utmost confidence as to which side possesses more power. Taking sides early on would strip you of your flexibility and limit you to working only one angle. You must be adept at playing both sides until you recognize which side would come out on top. The right way to maintain neutrality is to acknowledge the talents of everyone equally, while also expressing real views regarding their failures. Other than strengthening your position of neutrality, such a tactic would also earn you the respect of everyone. However, like every other tactic, you have to know when to apply this, and this knowledge would be the difference between you successfully holding your position or even advancing in the ranks, and you failing spectacularly. Manipulation in relationships. Manipulation in relationships is the one society is most sensitive about. If you manipulate in the office, most people, outsiders, would view it as a general tactic used by many in the same position. But manipulating in a relationship is, in the eye of most, a negative marker on the character of the manipulator. Regardless of whether your intentions are pure or selfish, this opinion does not change, and it is for this reason that whatever plan you have for a spouse or close friend must be done in utmost secrecy. This brings us to a previously stated point: isolation. Isolation is one of the most important factors to be considered if you want your manipulation of a person to be successful. You must wean the target off their family and friends, establishing yourself as their confidant and emotional companion. This is because the external influence exercised by such people is capable of rivaling that which you have created and rendering your plans a waste of time. Another thing to pay attention to is your intention. You must be disciplined. Check yourself and make sure that your needs from the target do not morph into complete selfishness. You must learn to control and wield the power you possess over them with caution and with sense to avoid causing them harm. This is only possible if you think beyond your own needs and ask yourself if your need might lead to any negative consequences for the target, and if so, how serious such consequences would be. Manipulation is a very powerful tool and should be treated as such. Manipulating a friend. Of all settings for manipulation, this is the most popular and the least suspicious or revolting. Manipulating a friend is so common we barely pay attention to it. It usually manifests when we want to get information or something out of one another. The best and easiest method of manipulating friends is through the use of reciprocity and compliments. Sometimes we do favors for friends because we want to, but we also grant difficult favors, not because we want to, but because we recognize that we might need something equally as difficult to grant in the future. You do not always have to do big things. It might be a couple of smaller favors, but having them in the bag means you could leverage on reciprocity later in the future. Beware of insensitive or particularly selfish people, because they tend not to conform to reciprocity, except it favors them in the moment. The use of compliments is another way by which we unknowingly and harmlessly manipulate ourselves. The compliment might be sincere or insincere, but when we give them, we recognize that they make our friends feel better about whatever it is they might have done, making them more likely to make us feel better too, whether by returning such compliments or by other means. Offering support sort of falls under reciprocity, but it is still valid as a standalone point. We might argue that offering our support to our friends in arguments and in their time of need is the right thing to do. But even when we think they are wrong, we rarely ever withdraw our support. Why? This is because when we have arguments or times when we need support, we recognize the need to have someone in our corner. And who better than someone who we offer unconditional support to when they need it? You can see that the manipulation is usually unintentional and harmless. But it is still a manipulation because if faced with the same choice when another person is involved, such a friend would probably do what they feel is right and not what you need. In this way, you can see that the need to reciprocate the support you showed has altered their behavior and reactions. Seductive manipulation. Like Cleopatra's manipulation of both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, this involves using your sexuality and possible sexual prowess as a tool in getting whatever it is you need from a target. While this is an effective method, it also doesn't last that long if you can't get the target to develop more tangible feelings for you. The truth is that there is a limit to how long sex can hold a person down, and because of this, it is better to initially play hard to get. This has the double effect of making them mistake their lust for a more potent feeling, while also pushing them to impress you just to get closer to achieving their target, which is having you. The key is in the timing. You have to be able to realize when the target might be losing interest and also recognize the steps you have to take to reignite their interest. Finally, you have to know when to give in. It would be better for your ploy if you have the sexual prowess to match your games, as this would make you less of a pretender and more of the real deal. If properly played, a game of seductive manipulation could lead to real feelings, and would thus make the target even more dependent on you. Everyone is susceptible to this sort of manipulation, because we all crave emotional and physical relationships with others, regardless of how small the urge is. How to properly manipulate strangers. Strangers are the hardest to manipulate or persuade, because you usually have no idea how they think, how they process information, or what makes them tick. In fact, most of the time, when you approach a stranger, you find yourself following your instincts and searching for a foothold in their minds that you can leverage into a real connection. This is the smart way to go when dealing with individuals you barely know, but such a method is slow and could end up being frustrating. The alternative is quicker, riskier, and used mostly by pickup artists. It is one in which you walk up to the target and impress he or she with an intoxicating mix of charm, wit, and the promise of a very interesting future. This plan could fall by the wayside if your version of humor doesn't click with theirs, or if your target is in the wrong state of mind for your ploy to have an effect. Another way is to go all out and state what you want. This is rarely utilized, mostly because it betrays the very essence of manipulation, secrecy, and emotional control. It is also rarely successful. So unless you are feeling lucky or the universe seems to be in your corner, don't try it. Chapter 10. Manipulating and Scouting, the Forgotten Connection. I like to compare the game of manipulation to the hunting rituals of a predator while hunting a prey. When hunting prey, the lions of the African savanna watch their unfortunate prey, say, a herd of wildebeests grazing in the distance. The lions, usually a pride, lie in wait, studying the unsuspecting prey, analyzing the herd, and seeking out the weak and the vulnerable of the herd, pretty much scouting the herd. After successfully picking a target, the lions then plan a mode of attack, assigning the roles of distraction and decoys to certain individuals of the pack, some to cut off the escape routes of the prey, and finally, one or more to finally bring down the prey. The manipulation game isn't too different from the scenario explained above. When scouting, the idea is not to hide or to skulk in the dark, but rather to size up your target emotionally and psychologically. It is the process by which you identify the initial footholds present in their minds and how they could be used to your advantage. Naturally, when starting the process of manipulation with a stranger, you are usually starting out blind, but when you skip the scouting phase altogether, you consign yourself to starting out on the weakest possible footing, further reducing your chances of succeeding. Watching your target is important. This is the first step and the very foundation of manipulating a target. As shown by the hunting lions, watching or studying gives you a basic info on the target, helping you understand the target's habits, likes and dislikes, wants and aspirations of such target that can be exploited, things that would prove useful in your arsenal for securing the target. A knowledge of the relevant basic info of a target reveals the weak points of such target, providing spots to be exploited and to get what is needed, and knowing how to trigger such target to get the required result. A good example of those weak points is the human emotions. As humans, a considerable amount of us tend to act and make decisions under the influence of our emotions, and are, as a result, slaves to our emotions. Emotions make a man because they are his basest, truest reactions to a situation, and most of the time we fall victim to our own emotions, expressing them without control, and as such, leaving us exposed to the ministrations and knowledgeable tweaking of manipulators. As earlier implied, you must always reserve extreme control over your own emotions and judge every situation logically. This helps you make the right decisions in every situation, and also protects you from manipulation, as you are the only one with the knowledge of your feelings. These emotions can act as catalysts to the decision-making process of the human mind without a lot of us realizing it. For example, an altruistic person, that selfless individual who wants to do right by everyone. Such persons' need to satisfy everyone can be exploited by the classic guilt trip move, by making them feel sad and unfulfilled, and making them do what you want. The knowledge gleaned from watching a target cannot be underestimated, and should be one of immense importance to your initial actions concerning such a target, guiding your action and words. Establishing trust. The importance of trust in manipulation can never be overstated. It is like the key which finally opens a door to a lost store of gems and treasures. Just like without the key, you have no access to the treasures which lay inside, so can you not truly manipulate a person without gaining their trust. This is the mistake made by pseudo-manipulators, and you would do well not to make similar ones. They make the mistake of misjudging how much the target trusts them, and as such show their hand too early. As a result, they are exposed to manipulation themselves because they then trust every one of your actions and words to be as a result of their influence. Trust has always been an active and essential ingredient for a successful human relationship. A child trusts its parents. That is why he or she can follow such parent to anywhere without fear for harm. So it is with the targets of manipulation. Once you have secured their trust, you become infallible. Your decisions are regarded to be accurate, and your word is held in highest regard. In some cases, this trust is easily gotten, like in the instance of the altruistic, good-willing, and generally naive people. But in other cases, it is not always gotten so easily, as one might have to go through various tests to finally earn that trust. But once the trust is finally earned, it is always worth the effort. You basically have them in the palm of your hand at this level, and they are as clay in the hands of a potter in your own hands, ready to bend to whatever direction you may wish. The subject of trust is also a critical one, as trust is as easy to lose as it is hard to gain. A couple of mistakes could easily cause you to lose the hard-earned trust of a target, and trust, when lost, isn't always exactly gotten back. Even if it is gotten back, it is never always in full. Planning a strategy of approach. Most of the time, for any endeavor to be successful, you need a strategy. Referencing the predator-prey scenario earlier stated, a strategy is a means towards an end or ultimate result. The word strategy brings the game of chess to mind. Every smart player knows that to win, a strategy must be in place to achieve such result. If trust is the key to a den of treasures, then your strategy is your plan to avoid the uncanny traps placed around to prevent seekers from reaching the treasure. The manipulation of a target has now become like a game of chess, where your every move must be tailored and aimed to getting what you want. It has become a game which for every action of the target, there should be a suitable reaction on the part of the manipulator to help get what is needed. Since human beings can be quite dissimilar in terms of constitution, intelligence, and emotional makeup, it goes without saying that one strategy cannot work for all, and different strategies should be employed for different targets and different occasions. One can choose to work a target little by little, slowly but surely getting the required result, or one could alternatively leave a bait for the target and wait patiently for the bite. The strategy applied must take into consideration the default emotional state of the target, the level of isolation of the target, the peculiarities of the person, as well as the general nature of the person. All of this are very important, and neglect of any one could lead to failure. Follow only what you see or hear. This is, in a way, related to the first point. Watching and studying the target would provide you with clues to exploit when working a target. These clues should be your pointers, guiding you on the next step to take or what to say next. But contrary to the first point, this is a warning. You should never try to use a clue or a feeling not present in a particular target against him or her. As humans, we possess the tendency to judge people based on what we would do in their shoes, and not based on what they have shown they would do. You have to kick out this tendency, as it could mess with your reactions to the target's actions, even without clouding your judgment. It makes you doubt the soundness of your judgment, pushing you to react against what you would do and feel instead of what you can observe the target doing or feeling. Indiscriminate or excessive use of such could put you in trouble, and you could ruin the whole process, causing you to start the whole process all the way from the beginning. Never forget, the idea behind a successful manipulation is determining the target's emotional state and reactions, and using this to your advantage. Never let doubt creep in and spoil what is already almost done. Only follow what you can see and hear, and nothing else. Chapter 1. Introduction to Dark Psychology. It's a bit of a well-kept secret that the ability to manipulate people is a useful tool. It's one of the reasons how businessmen and politicians get and hold their positions. There comes a certain point in your life wherein completely turning off your emotions and being pragmatic is a skill you need to have. Nobody likes to discuss it because we have this societal fear of the reality that people can just be seen as a means to an end. The late Steve Jobs was particularly renowned for his ability to work with people's emotions and to say just the right thing that would get them to come around to his view. It was so strong, in fact, that the people around him developed their own term for it, the reality distortion field, a phrase coined from a similar phenomenon in the Star Trek universe. There are numerous historical instances of Steve Jobs taking advantage of his unique ability to get precisely what he wanted. One such instance was when Jobs, in the 1980s, was trying to get Pepsi CEO John Scully to come to Apple. This exchange spawned a famous line that many know today. Quote, "Do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?" End quote. There is a lot to be said about his specific ability to charm and manipulate people, not the least of which was his deep understanding of what people wanted as well as what people wanted to hear. Add on to this an understanding of subtle intimidation, power cues, and a large amount of passion and charisma, and you have a powerhouse who could get pretty much whatever he wanted. How does all of this apply to you? Well, you're reading this because you want to learn how to work with people from the inside out. You want to know how to say just the right thing to get what you need, and how to manipulate people such that you can bypass any obstacles, so they will do exactly what you want. If that's the case, then you've come to the right place. The fact is that the mind is a relatively simple thing. While the brain is infinitely complex, the manifestations of the conscious mind are both resolute and easy to work with. Most people work in very obvious and predictable ways, such that if they're a normal person, you can rather easily figure out the best way to work with them in no time flat. The purpose is to analyze all of these patterns within the context of people in general, so that you can learn the best way to put these trends to use. Some people will, of course, break these standard molds, and for this reason, there are a couple chapters dedicated to the idea of knowing the person you're working with, reading their inner and outer body language and mental cues, and knowing how to build a paradigm that you can easily manipulate them with. In the end, this is about using the concept of neuro-linguistic programming to its fullest to get what you want out of people. A more common term for this is manipulation. However, the aim of neuro-linguistic programming is slightly different. Neuro-linguistic programming is more focused on the long-term shifting of attitudes, where manipulation is more based on immediate gains. That isn't to say that neuro-linguistic programming isn't a form of manipulation, though it absolutely is. When you hear the term manipulation, you will probably have some sort of knee-jerk reaction like, "Wait, isn't manipulation wrong?" And to this question, there is no simple answer. I have to say, no, though. Manipulation isn't wrong. Manipulation is simply a tool. How you use it can determine whether it's wrong or not. For example, an example of manipulation being objectively wrong is doing something that gets somebody terribly hurt. There are also some unspoken rules that you should never break. For example, while it's pretty easy to take advantage of the fact that somebody's parent is dying, actually doing so is a major ethical gray area. If you stick to maintaining an ethical approach, then manipulation actually proves itself as a method of understanding people and knowing how to work with them, so things will work out better for you. You can even use manipulation for good purposes. One such example is Steve Jobs yet again, who used his reality distortion field for good causes, such as when he would convince his employees that it was possible to do something that was more or less impossible, which in turn would make them work harder for the end result, and eventually led to a new mark being set in technology. We all know that psychology is the study and analysis of the human mind and human behavior. So, what is dark psychology? It is the science and art of manipulating and controlling the human mind through various methods. Psychology is central to human interactions, thoughts, and actions, whereas dark psychology involves the use of tactics of persuasion, motivation, coercion, and manipulation to get what you want. There is a phenomenon in this realm referred to as the dark psychology triad that consists of elements that help in detecting potential criminal behavior in people. The dark triad is a combination of traits using narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. What are the characteristic features of each of these dark triad traits? Narcissism is related to lack of empathy, high levels of egotism, and grandiosity. Machiavellianism. People with this attitude have little or no sense of morality and ruthlessly employ manipulation and other tactics to exploit and/or deceive others. Psychopathy. These people come across as very charming and charismatic, and deep down are highly impulsive, selfish, lack empathy, and are fairly remorseless. Yes, it is true that none of us wants to be manipulated, and yet it happens in our daily lives with unerring regularity, many times unwittingly. Additionally, we also use mind control and manipulation tactics to try and get what we want. Dark psychology involves studying the psychodynamics of people who prey on and victimize others to achieve their own needs. There are people who use dark psychology tactics knowingly and with the intention to cause harm to others, and there are those who use or are prey to these tactics in unwitting ways. Moreover, it is a survival instinct in all living beings to be wary of our surroundings and use guile and deception to survive and thrive. There are multiple studies that prove this innate ability to victimize others. Although we believe that we have control over our actions and reactions, under extreme pressure, it is very difficult to predict our behaviors, and there are high chances that many employ dark tactics to escape from these pressures. The following studies are examples of how human minds behave in unpredictable ways when compelled, or sometimes even when it may not have needed such an extreme reaction. Let us look at some of these experiments conducted in the 60s and 70s by psychologists. While there are controversies surrounding the experiments and plausible rationalizations were provided in retrospect, it goes without doubt that the human mind can be very unpredictable and is capable of reaching out to its dark aspects with little or no provocation. The learner was actually only an actor. If the learner gave a wrong answer, the volunteers were told to give electric shocks by turning the dial, which had labels ranging from mild pain to extreme pain, to even fatal pain. The experimenter, wearing a lab coat, told the volunteers that they should continue to increase the intensity of the electrical shock until the right answer was given by the learner. The volunteers could hear the simulated screams of the learner from the other room. If the volunteer did not want to increase the intensity, then the experiment told them to continue employing the current statements. Please continue. The experiment needs you to go on. It is essential that you go on. You have no choice. You have to go on. There were startling and disturbing outcomes from this rather controversial experiment. Despite hearing the simulated screams of extreme pain from the learners, 65% of the volunteers turned the knob to fatal. They did not even bother to ask about the health of the learner, yet most of the volunteers said that they would have never behaved this way, but did not find the wherewithal to stand up to a figure of authority, lab-coated experimenter. Dark psychology is easy to trigger, isn't it? The most disturbing observation of these kinds of experiments was the fact that the volunteers were not even aware that they were being manipulated and that they were delving into the dark aspects of their mind. Another study which proved the unconscious behavior under authority goes as follows. A group of volunteers was asked to watch a screen in which a basketball game was going on. They were told to count the number of passes that took place between players wearing white shirts. At some point during the game, a person dressed in a gorilla costume walked into the court. The participants were so engrossed in counting the number of passes that they did not even notice this aberration. In fact, many participants swore that no such disturbance took place. They were unconsciously following the orders of the experimenter. Another common dark psychology tactic is called priming, in which people's behaviors can be changed without them even realizing it. For example, read this sentence. Quote, "The house was so old that it groaned, creaked, and struggled to stand on its shaky foundation." End quote. Now, suppose you were to stand up. Chances are very high that you will unconsciously have taken care to do so at a slower pace than usual, as you were just now primed for old age. Politicians are known to use priming to change voting preferences based on the location of the booth. Like this, there are many studies which prove that accessing and employing the dark side of our minds is not just easy, but can happen without us even being aware of it. Moreover, these theories have been applied and checked repeatedly throughout the history of mankind, and dark psychology is an integral part of our minds. This is not the same as conspiracy theories. Dark psychology only represents the innate need and desire for man to dominate over others who are weaker than himself, so as to achieve his own needs. Marketing advertisements are classic examples of manipulating the minds of the buyers and convincing them to buy the product, which they may or may not need. Therefore, it makes sense to know, understand, and appreciate this aspect of our minds and use strategies and tips to prime our minds and those of others in ways that will result in win-win situations for all concerned stakeholders. Persuasion. Persuasion is one of the most popular forms of mind control. This method is used in so many different areas of life that many people don't even recognize when it is happening. That is exactly why it works. Persuasion is not the same as convincing, although most people believe the two are the same thing. However, persuasion is the act of skillfully encouraging someone to do what you want them to do without them realizing you're doing it, whereas convincing someone means that you're using tactics that are easy to recognize. To explain it a bit further, persuading means to skillfully present facts and information in a way that doesn't make it obvious that you're doing so, and encouraging people to do what you desire for them to do. Convincing people, on the other hand, is very obvious and often includes a lot of back and forth and ultimately nagging, begging, or pleading someone to make the decision you want them to make after they have already chosen the alternative. When you're learning about persuasion, it may seem easy. In reality, it is a strategy that requires a lot of time, effort, and practice. You cannot simply read about persuasion and then run out and master it. Instead, you really need to ensure that you grasp the concept and that you practice putting it into action in your daily life. In Chapter 6, you will learn about many real-life strategies that can help you further integrate this technique into your life. Manipulation. Manipulation tends to be regarded as one of the darker methods of mind control, and many people think it is a nasty thing to do. However, when you learn to use manipulation properly, you can use it to gain control over virtually anyone's mind and have your desired effect on their decisions and actions. Unlike persuasion, which is typically comprised of conversational tactics, manipulation involves external influences to help encourage people to do what you want them to do. These include strategies like building trust and proving why they should do what you want them to do. While some of these strategies are conversational, they are often impacted by external influences, unlike persuasion, which relies merely on wording structure and methods of structuring your sentences and conversations. Deception. Deception is an extremely sophisticated strategy that is used in mind control. This is not the process of outright lying to people, but rather tactfully covering up certain pieces of information to avoid them from ever being discovered. This strategy allows people to knowingly omit information from conversations without being considered liars, since they have never directly been asked and therefore they have never directly lied. When you're partaking in deception, you have to be tactful and consistent in keeping the conversation away from any question that may put you in a position where you must either come clean or actually lie. Using deception as a secondary manipulation method for mind control purposes means controlling the conversation and preventing it from ever going in the direction that would suggest information that you are lying or covering up information. In order to skillfully use deception, you need to know how to guide the conversation in a way that leads the listener to believe something without ever actually being told to believe it. For example, If you want to prevent someone from finding out that you're attracted to someone they also like, you could create the illusion that you are not. You never actually admit that you aren't. You just lead the conversation so that it can be assumed that you aren't. This is a powerful form of mind control because it allows you to deny ever doing anything wrong. Since you have never admitted to anything or lied about anything, you can easily say that it was the listener's fault for not asking or for assuming anything was implied. Subliminal messages. When you use subliminal messages, you are sending messages without someone actually knowing that you are doing so. These messages tend to slip past the conscious mind and directly into the subconscious. The powerful thing about subliminal messages is that you can be telling someone one thing and yet having them hear something entirely different. While this conscious mind digests something they are willingly accepting, their subconscious mind may be hearing something entirely different. Because you have put them into a receptive mode, they are more likely to react and respond in the way that you want them to, and their subconscious mind is more likely to accept the information as well. Subliminal messaging is powerful because it allows you to control the mind without any indication that you're doing so. You can speak directly through the conscious mind and into the subconscious mind, thus planting information, evidence, and knowledge into the subconscious that encourages your listener to support your position and act or think in the way that you want them to. You are literally programming their mind with your desired messages, and they have no idea that you are doing so. Mind control is a very powerful strategy that can enable you to have people thinking in your favor. These individuals are going to unknowingly be listening extremely closely to your sentences and hanging on your every word while giving into anything you want. Because of your masterful ability to control their minds without them even knowing it, you will be able to have any desired outcome effortlessly. People often have a few different traits which you can use to understand them, such things as their body language, their life situation, and their emotions. All of these impact one another. In the following chapters, we will break down all of these aspects to help you understand exactly what position you're in. Body language is a huge giveaway about what's going on in a person's head. Understand that, in terms of neuro-linguistic programming, body language is a language in and of itself. We're going to expand on this concept just a bit, so we can gain an understanding of how we can read and process other people's emotions. This is actually a very critical part of neuro-linguistic programming, and one of the things that makes it such a challenge. Doing it properly is not like picking a lock. There is no correct path for you to do it right. It's a very dynamic activity, which is heavily centered on your ability to understand what the other person is thinking in a very concrete manner. Understand that a person has many physical tells, but that's not the be-all, end-all of what is going on in a person's mind. Some people are so good at hiding their emotions that you can't really tell what's going on under the hood unless you know them very well. Often, people will have two emotions running in parallel. These can be difficult to decipher, but generally, they have the emotion at their foreground. This is what they display themselves to be feeling. And they have their emotion in the background, which is what they are feeling under the hood. Some people are worse than others when it comes to hiding their emotions, while some people make no effort at all. There are times, too, when these emotions may run in tandem and are exactly the same. The truth is, though, that if you're trying to convince somebody of something, you always have to consider the possibility that People don't often feel what they're projecting themselves to be feeling. Usually, you have to consider what these parallel emotions could be. We'll focus more on the underlying emotions when we get to the chapter on psychoanalysis. However, for now, we just need to focus primarily on reading emotions on the surface. People convey a lot of their emotions through their body language, as well as through their tone of voice and their choice of words. If you pay attention to a person's eyes, you can read a lot into somebody's foreground emotion, while hopefully you're emotionally competent enough to read foreground emotions relatively well. Note that some of these can be difficult to break apart from one another. For example, while the difference between annoyance and anger are slight in terms of their physical display, they have far different emotional connotations. Annoyance is much shorter and less severe, though perhaps more immediately snappy. Anger is more brooding and harder to work your way out of. Their tone of voice will also tell you a lot. Often, when people aren't being completely honest about the emotion they're presenting, their voice will sound ever so slightly off. Being able to recognize this and using context clues to figure out what's really bothering them or going on in their head is very important. Sometimes their choice of words will give you hints as well. Pay attention and try to notice if their sentences are structured differently. Are they shorter? Is their choice of words more serious than usual? In essence, pay attention to a person's body language, as it will tell you a lot about what you need to know when it comes to what a person is feeling, at least on the surface level. When you combine that with your analysis of their underlying conditions, you actually get a very potent piece of information that you can work with. NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. NLP involves the three most powerful elements that contribute to the human experience, and they are neurology, language, and programming. So, how can we use NLP to influence people? Here are some answers to that. NLP techniques are in use both in business and personal relationships to influence people around you. NLP techniques are designed to help you get your message across in the correct way so that they are interpreted by people to give you your desired outcomes. NLP techniques also focus on the choice and appropriate use of language to help you motivate people around you to get something good done. NLP techniques are designed in such a way that, if used correctly, they can help you teach others how to become more productive and efficient in their lives, which in turn helps you in your life as well. NLP techniques are also designed for salespeople so that they're able to reach the subconscious level of the buyer's mind in such a way that they feel good and happy about buying the product or service. The basic presumption of NLP is that each of us is unique in the way we think, we interpret, and the way we present ourselves to the outside world. NLP says that if we know how we think, then we can be empowered to change the way we think. Extending the same logic outside of us, if we know how people think, we can empower ourselves and them to influence changes in their thought processes. Let us take an example. Each of us has a unique way of translating what we see around us into thoughts. Our preference could be to the use of sight, sound, or touch, or a unique combination of all three. If our preferred sense is that of sight, then we easily convert the events of our life into pictures and images in our thoughts. If our preferred sense is that of touch, we easily convert our experiences into feelings. Let's take this a bit further. Suppose you had a preference for the sense of sight. This preferred sense is actually very evident in the way you interact with others. For example, you will use phrases like, "See you later," or "I can see how this will turn out," etc. You will normally be the type of person who decides that when something or someone is out of sight, then that person or thing is out of your mind, too. So, with a person whose sense preference is that of touch, phrases like, "catch you later," or "I'm getting a bad feeling from this," etc., will be used. So, by knowing these preferences and the way they become evident through their language and thought, we can understand people better, and once we understand their behavior, we can more easily influence the way they think. It is a natural thing to be fond of those individuals who are like us in the way they think and behave. So by knowing their preferred means of communication, we can use the same way to communicate with them and therefore make it easy for us to influence them. A classic example of NLP influencing technique is to synchronize your breathing with that of the other person. Watch when the person breathes in, and you match your inhalation with that. When you match every breath of yours with the other person's, you will find an invisible connection to the individual, giving you a great boost in terms of influencing his or her thoughts. Thank you for listening. This preview is now over. I hope you enjoyed this preview of my audiobook, Manipulation Techniques to Influence People, Dark Psychology 202, published by Sebastian Cooper and Brandon Goff. Please make sure to check out the full audiobook on audible.com. Thank you for listening.
This has been Become a Master of Persuasion, 2-in-1 bundle. How to influence people plus 5 hours of positive affirmations. The #1 beginner's box set to advanced manipulation techniques and boost your confidence. Written by John Clark. Narrated by Andrea Nelson, Edgar Alexander, and Byron Armstrong. Copyright 2019 by John Clark. Production copyright 2019 by John Clark. The end.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.